Welcome back to another episode of the Artisans of Steel. My name is Marako Malmasi, custom knife maker, uh, operator, and founder of Malmasi Fire Arts. And I'm here sharing conversations with some of the most talented makers that I know of, people that I look up to and who I draw inspiration from, who I'm fortunate to call my friends. And we're here to have conversations about knife making, about the industry, for anybody who's anywhere on their path, honestly, from being a brand new to extremely advanced, and anywhere in between, because there's always something to learn, no matter where you at on your journey. So before we get started, though, with my esteemed guest, Mr. Salem Straub, I got a few sponsors I want to give some love to real quick. Maritime Knife Supply. You can find them on Instagram at Maritime Knife Supply. You can also find them on Facebook and TikTok talk under the same handle. They have great knife supply, from anything from anvils to grinders to abrasives to handle pins to steel powders, like basically anything you can imagine or think that you need for making knives. You can source from them. They're based out of Atlantic portion of Canada, and I'm looking forward to meeting the peeps at Maritime at Makers Camp, actually coming up in about 8 days now. It'll be good. It'll be fun. All right, and that's our next sponsor, super sponsor, from Patreon is Mr. Gabe Fletcher. He is Anchorage Forge on Instagram. He is also the owner and founder of Anchorage brewing some of the best beers I've ever drank in my entire life. And really great guy, super talented, kind of a jack of all trades, but really found his niche in the brewing sector, and he is straight killing it. Um, yeah, he's a great guy, and I urge anybody, if you have access to a local market or a fancy grocery store or whatever, those are the places that'll probably be carrying Anchorage brews. And you can actually, I think the Maelstrom beer is, I have a buddy who lives down in Bend, Oregon, and he's still finding it in a few different shops. And I think he was in Portland recently, and he got some out there too. So go check out Anchorage Brewing, Anchorage Forge. Follow Gabe; he's a great guy, and he's doing really cool stuff. And he's also been fun to work with and teach some stuff too. He picks it up real quick, and I look forward to working with him more in the future. Next is Mr. Tony Sasma of TNT Forge, at TNT Forge on Instagram. He's a great guy. He's making chef's knives. He's definitely a solid follow. He gets some really great finishes on his blades and his handles. I don't know how he's doing it exactly. I haven't picked his brain yet. But he's definitely worth a follow. He's doing some really cool stuff, and he's a great guy. Our next sponsor is Brian Hinnenkamp from Tortuga Blade Works. He's actually just a little bit north of me, and west of Salem. And he is a pizza fiend. He's also a doctor, and he is a very talented maker. He's worked with makers like Jason Knight, and he's doing really cool stuff, especially with Sanmai. I'm sorry, I keep looking over like at my notes. I should be looking here. Anyways, solid follow. Go check him out. He's been doing a lot of kind of instructional stuff and showing a lot of his process for making his knives and with liners and sculpting and all kinds of cool stuff. So go check him out. You know he's on his knife making journey. He's sharing it with everybody, and it's a really good follow. Next is Mr. Josh Weston. He's Josh A. Weston on Instagram. And he is part of the Dragon Forge experience. He's also a former graphic designer. He's a very creative and talented forger. He's worth a follow. He's got these Dragon Forges he's been building lately, and it's been cool to see the evolution of these forges from kind of a simpler structure to just continually getting more advanced every time they build one. I think they're on their fourth or fifth possibly even their sixth. I'm not sure exactly. I haven't been keeping exact tally, but the most recent one that Josh has been posting about is freaking badass, and it's worth going over and checking it out because I honestly am starting to pick my brain a little bit and like maybe when I get a place set up more solid, because right now I just rent and my shop space out of a friend's property. But if I get it my shop on my own property, I'd love to build one of those dragon forges because they're pretty rad. And my wife and kid love dragons, so and I like dragons too. So it'd be fun. And speaking of dragons, our next sponsor is Michael Poor. He's Red Dragon Forge over on Instagram. He's a foodie, not a footy. He's not playing soccer, at least not that I know of. But he is a foodie. He's a bladesmith. He's been doing a lot of really cool work, forging more traditional style stuff, traditional Japanese style like wakizashis and katanas, and doing tamahagane smelts and then consolidating that material. And it's really intense process. And he's doing really cool work with it. Go follow Red Dragon. He's on Instagram at Red Dragon Forge. He's definitely a great guy and a good follow. And then last but not least, we have Russell Tinsley of Ouzel Finch Beers. They're over in Virginia and they are making some really tasty kind of more sours and more kind of on the fruity side of beers, and they're super delicious. Yeah, he sent me a nice little care package, and I wish that they were available more locally. And I need to actually talk to my local beer market about getting their beers over here because we have a few beer markets that I should be hitting up. But I think more people would be loving this over on the West Coast, and there aren't really a lot of these kind of like beers available over here. So go check out Russell. His knife making handle is Can't Make Knives. His beer handle is Ouzel Finch Beers, and he also started the Nost Brewing Project, which is Nost is, I believe it's Greek. It's the foundation of the word nostalgia, and so they're making kind of more nostalgic beers that are like, for me locally, it would be like Rainier or Pabst or Olympia beers, but also like Budweiser, a lot of the lighter beers. These beers taste like those, but they're made with more higher quality ingredients, and they're like, it's almost like what you wish those beers originally tasted like when you first started drinking them. They're really awesome. So they have that nostalgic quality to them, but they're definitely higher quality. So go check out Nos Brewing Project as well. All right. My sponsor for today, he's been waiting very patiently here while I kind of work things out. I was struggling before we started up the stream to get some photos uploaded, but we got them. And but his name is Salem Straub. Some of you may have heard of him. I'm fortunate to call him my friend. He's one of the most talented, I would say, honestly, and most creative Damascus makers currently in the world. Really, really doing a great job thinking outside of the box. I featured him in this year's calendar, the Artisans of Steel calendar, because of his creativity, because of his, I can't think of the word right now, innovation, and in rediscovering also like ancient patterns like the Sanshir pattern that I mean he would know better, but I don't know of anybody who's made that pattern since it was maybe originally made long time ago. But he's really innovating a lot of pattern welding techniques as well, and collaborating with a lot of great people. He's also a talented skater. He's a drummer and guitarist and a musician in general. He's a cook. He's a great guy. He's also a machinist. I mean, this guy has all the skills, and I'm gonna pull him in here now. Um, he has more skills than I think I can ever acquire in just this one lifetime. He's got the goods. That's for sure. So Salem, how you doing, my friend? It's good to see you and talk to you again.
Man, thanks a ton for having me on. I'm a big fan of the podcast here,
Thank you.
and what an introduction! You're far too kind, good sir.
No,
Um,
I'm being honest.
well, you can see I do have a lot of musical instruments behind me. That is fun
Oh yeah.
stuff. I'm not going to sing you guys a medley today, though. So,
Damn, maybe at the end.
Yeah,
Maybe
but
if we're crushing some beers, if we were doing this in person,
oh
have a couple
yeah,
beers and play some music.
we got to do that.
Yeah. So you've had great conversations, other just like other makers I've had on this podcast. You had a really great conversation with Jeff Fader over at his Full Blast podcast. So if anybody wants to go really deep on your background, your history, they can go check that out. But can we get just kind of a quick kind of 5-10 minute, like, where do you come from? How did you get started? um what were some of your early inspirations, and we'll start there with that.
Okay, well, right now I'm sitting about 25-30 minutes from where I was born,
Oh,
you know,
okay.
just here in this valley. So, you know,
Wow.
I lived here till I was about 14, and everybody wants to leave that small town when they're a teenager,
Sure.
see the wide world and stuff. But
Yeah.
after I did some of that, I figured out I kind of like it here better. So I'm back for the duration over
Yep.
here on the dry side of the mountains, as it were.
Sure.
And this is a great place to set up shop. Got a nice shop that my morning commute is to just walk across my driveway, and that's it. So no real reason to change that at any point in the future.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, so uh, like I say, I grew up here most of my early years anyway, and like my dad was a painter and an artist, and like my sister and brother are musical and stuff. So we always had a lot of creativity and music and art and stuff around. But then also my dad, besides like painting in the basement, he had a bit of a workshop, and he was
Okay.
more of a carpenter by inclination,
Okay.
and really like um, we never had too much money. Like we had enough, but that was
Sure.
about it. And so a lot of the time, if we needed like a chest of drawers or something, he would make it. He would go buy like the cheap
Wow.
plywood, and then like use his cheap table saw, and like we use some sheetrock screws and make us each a dresser, stuff like that. Very
Right.
like practical, get her done woodworking.
It sounds like
But
me right now, honestly, whenever I build stuff.
yeah, I mean, there's just every reason to build things. I
Yeah.
mean, it might not be as slick as like something you can get from even IKEA, but it's going to be way better than what you could get from Walmart for like the cost of materials.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And it gives you a solid rationale for also acquiring tools, which I am absolutely all about. Um,
You
so I had,
sure are.
yeah, I had him as an example early on, for just making your own stuff, and just the idea that people do that. And I could even go down there, like I don't think he was particularly worried about me hurting myself, because I could run the bench grinder and stuff, you
Mhm.
know, and like the hand. We didn't have a drill press. We were like straight hand drill mode.
Oh, yeah, with like
But
a
yeah, I could do all that stuff down there when I was 7 or 8. I think he would just leave me down there by that old,
wow.
and so I would tinker with stuff, or he'd had little projects for me.
Yeah.
And and so that kind of started it out. And he actually made a few knives. Um,
Really?
yeah, and I don't know like where he got the idea necessarily, or if he had any reference material at the time to work from. I think it might have been like the Foxfire books, if anything. You ever hear those things?
Uh-uh.
They were popular in the 70s. They started coming out, and it was kind of like with the revival, like the Back to the Land movement, and things like traditional handcrafts.
Sure. Interesting.
And so the Foxfire book, you'd learn how you could make a rustic banjo, or you could make soap out of like pig fat and lye, all these old school like Appalachian mountain crafts and stuff. And
Interesting.
part of like Foxfire 4, I think, was blacksmithing, and they had those books when I was growing up. So
Sure.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was that. But anyway, he was getting old files, and he'd go over to the bench grinder and try to grind all the teeth off the still fully hard old file. It took forever and everything like that. And then you'd use the wood stove to try to heat treat them and things. But and then put the handles on with aluminum rivets, you know. But they were knives, and I saw him making them, and
Yeah.
he had fun making them, and we used them for stuff. And he made me a little one to throw in the ground, you know. So I had my own little knife he had made me, and I had to
Oh,
learn how to
sure.
stick it in the ground every time. Amazing how difficult even that is when you're 8.
I
So that was,
remember doing that kind of stuff too.
yeah, man, it's still fun.
It's
Like
super fun.
a little mumbly peg with a little beater knife.
Oh yeah.
So there was that, and I think that was the extent to which knife making really crossed my radar for a while. I got a little older, and I was always raised reading a lot, and so I was down in my room like reading novels and stuff when I was 10 years old, and I eventually came across the Wheel of Time series by
Mm.
Robert Jordan, a big epic fantasy thing, like 14 books long, and
Holy smokes, I had no idea.
yeah, it's staggering in scope.
Wow.
And I was reading them back when he was still writing most of them, so you had to wait like you just binge one in like 2 days, and you'd have to wait a year until it came out the next one. But there was
Yeah.
a character in there. He was a blacksmith. His name was Perrin. He was a young man that left his village and had to square, this big complex world with his kind of sheltered upbringing
Hmm.
and his simplistic ideas about morality and like logic and things like that. And
Sure.
blacksmithing for him was very tied up in logic and morality and things like that. He would
Interesting.
view problems with the world like being a blacksmith puzzle. So it very much talked about all that stuff and had scenes of him working in the forge. And I remember just thinking, man, like that is the coolest thing ever, blacksmithing, and so that was another influence, and that was on the back burner for a while. I spent my teenage years doing whatever, and when I started working again, then I was in construction, and so when you're in construction, you kind of have tools around, and maybe
Sure.
you got a shed in your backyard you could put a bench vise in or something. So
Hmm.
I was watching a lot of kung fu cinema, and
Sure.
like samurai movies,
Yeah.
uh, Kira Kurosawa, or
Seven
like
Samurai. I was just gonna
Seven
say
Samurai,
Akira
dude.
Kurosawa.
Yeah, yeah, and like
Yeah.
Rashomon and Yojimbo and those things, and then also like the Samurai trilogy, which is about Musashi, and so it's all about swords and stuff like that. So
Sure.
naturally, like, well, I'm obviously gonna make a sword at some point.
Of course.
Yeah. So like
It's
many
something
knife
that
makers,
makes you
like,
powerful, right?
yeah, well, and powerful and like just, an
Sure.
arbiter,
I see.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Not just like you're gonna do what I want you to do or else type
Because
deal.
I have the power of the sword.
That's right, the sword. Um, but yeah, so I was like getting into martial arts to the degree possible with resources I had around, and metalworking bit by bit, and uh, and
Can we
then I
pause?
moved.
What
Yeah, go
age was
ahead.
that at?
This is being at like 18,
Okay.
18ish, 19ish.
So 18, you're consuming all these movies, you're reading the books, and
Yep, yep.
yeah. Okay.
And like starting to cobble some tools together and stuff. And it was still a little bit more about blacksmithing
Sure.
more than anything. But I remember, cruising around, like Anvil Fire was even on the internet then,
Hmm.
which was like 2001 and two probably.
Sure.
And looking around in the classifieds and seeing somebody had a Paragon anvil for like, it's a 250-pound Paragon for $400. It just seemed like
Holy
an
smokes.
unimaginable amount of money,
Right.
like if I could
That's
go
such
back
a
and
great
buy that
deal.
now.
How much would that anvil be right now? Probably close to $2,000.
Oh man, it'd be a lot. I couldn't afford it. I'm glad I bought in before this stuff skyrocketed.
Sure.
But yeah, so and then my parents bought some like remote property. Like they retired from their business east of the mountains. I'd been living in Western Washington, Bellingham and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, I lived there for quite a while, and then so they moved out remote onto this undeveloped property. It's like 20 acres, 40 miles from town, off grid by like 10 miles on
Oh
dirt
wow.
road. Just
Sure.
the on the other side of the fence was national forest, pretty much unbroken till Canada. Like it was just out there, and so I went out there to help them build a cabin Like they were going to build a cabin and live, and it took us 3 years to build that cabin.
Oh wow.
Because we cut all the wood for it, and then peeled all the wood and
Like
like
Dick Prenicky style.
yeah, man, like Foxfire book style, just old school. We had a chainsaw, but that was like the peak of our technology.
Sure.
And like hand dug an entire basement and slip formed with a little concrete mixer the whole basement. Me and my dad, so that it took us a while. Every winter I would come back to the coast and work all winter and stuff while they were holed up, in the snow.
Yeah.
And so it was really out there though that I had the space to start out blacksmithing, like I wanted to. And fortunately, you don't need electricity to blacksmith. I touched base with a machinist in town here, and he sold me like a hand crank forge blower.
Sure.
And I would just use charcoal that I would scrape off like burnt trees that I would find and stuff. I'd go into the woods with like a bucket and a hatchet, like 2 buckets and a hatchet. And I go harvest my charcoal, like
Right.
3-4 days worth of pine forging charcoal, and then just go like, yeah, put it in my ghetto forge I made out of Datsun truck parts. And yeah, a railroad tech anvil, everything like that. But it was the best, man, because there was just no noise out there. There was birds in the wind, and then the noise of me hitting the anvil, and then like the little bit of the fire. Just
somebody's 5 miles away saying, "Who the fuck's hitting stuff?"
Definitely, yeah, they probably were. But boy,
I came out here for the wind and the.
You're right.
The birds.
Well, and then they fire up their generator for half a day. So.
Oh, sure. All right, fair is fair.
Yeah.
Crazy. It's just so you were. It sounds like you might have been in Bellingham or going back and forth from Bellingham. When Bob was living up there before he moved down to Olympia, and I met Bob.
I didn't know that he had been there before.
Yeah, he was up in Bellingham. I think from 2003 to 2000. No, sorry. Probably 2000, around 2000 and like 2005 or 6.
Yeah. I was in that area from like 96 or 7 on through like off and on through like 2006.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Just kind of seasonally and stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. So you got your start out on the property. You've cobbled together, but you built it yourself. You're getting things done.
Yeah.
And
sort of.
Well, and I know at some point you make your way over to the islands and maybe to the Hawaiian Islands, and maybe you're getting there. But how long are you working at your parents' property where you help build the cabin? You're doing that just for the 3 years you help build the cabin, or do you continue working off that property?
I was just out there for 3 summers.
3 summers, okay.
And then like the first year I just left my tools and stuff up there, and I came back and worked for the winter. So I didn't have much. But by the second summer I'd spent out there, I was like, yeah, I'm loading like my anvil. I'd gotten like a Peter Wright, and like a post vise and some stuff already. So I was like, I'm bringing that with me to Bellingham over the winter because I can't like not be doing this now.
Sure.
And then I lived in like the scummiest section of Bellingham in a condemned house with like 10 other people my age.
Perfect.
And like I just lived out in the garage, crashed in a sleeping bag in the garage, but then I had like my shop on the side of the garage, so it was like kind of my dominion out there on Texas Street in Bellingham.
Texas Street.
That was a rough winter, man, but it was a fun one too. So yeah, I was doing that for a couple of summers, working over the winters. Then my wife got set up on a blind date with me, and actually came over. It was like, meet this guy and his parents all in one fell swoop. No pressure. It was weird for both of us, but it actually worked out quite well, obviously.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, so
she stuck it out.
Indeed. So that was 2005 then. And so we got married in February 2006.
Okay.
In Bellingham. And then we came back out one summer, finished the house up. Once the house was done, we went to California for about 4 months and then straight out to Hawaii.
Got ya.
Because I had to wait a little bit for this job. I got hired on for a job big like hotel construction in Hawaii. They were putting
I see.
together a bigger crew, and then was like, hurry up and wait. So 4 months
And that was
went
in
by.
Oahu?
That was on Maui.
That was on Maui. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, like the northwest Maui.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
So, oh, so like Lahaina, kind of?
yeah. We lived in Lahaina in a couple spots, a couple
Sure.
places, and then like Honokawai and upcountry too.
Nice.
Yeah.
Um, when you were first starting, you were going back and forth from Bellingham and helping out at your parents. And you were smithing. What were you working? Were you making knives, or were you working on swords, or were you just doing simple hardware,
Little,
practicing basic
little
blacksmithing skills?
little bit of all that.
Yeah.
There's a thing in Tonasket called the Barter Fair. It's kind of like the most known thing about Tonasket
Okay.
in a lot of circles. It's been going on since I want to say like 1972 ish, and it's just like it started out as a barter fair, alternative economy. What do you got? Let's trade it. Maybe I need what you have,
Mm.
etc. But then it kind of over the years grew into a festival. Where it'd be like 8 to 10,000 people,
Oh
and which
wow.
is the biggest city in our county when it's actually existent for that weekend.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and a fun spot to be for sure. So I would go like have a booth blacksmithing at that thing and just try to make coat hooks and like little jewelry, a few simple knives like those patch style knives, the blacksmith knife with
Oh
the
yeah.
bent
Okay.
around steel handle and candlesticks, just whatever I could figure out how to make. I was reading like The Art of Blacksmithing by Alex Beeler and like
Oh sure.
New Edge of the Anvil by Jack Andrews and Practical Blacksmithing and Metalwork, just whatever. Like, I had a pretty good library built up over time,
Yeah.
and it was usually just like hand drawn stuff that you could try to make.
Yeah.
And
I have a
yes,
few of those books that have those hand drawn.
yeah, man.
That was
But
the
like,
style in that day.
it was gold. Every new book I could find,
Yeah.
and like from the public library a lot too. Um,
Sure.
so yeah, I was making random stuff. I was, make hinges. I try to make hinges for like gates, gate hardware for like fences that we put up on the property
Right.
and like draw knives for peeling logs because we had to do that stuff.
Right.
And the log dogs. So when you're building a log cabin, the logs kind of go in notches over each other at the corners.
Sure.
But when you want to do a really nice job of fitting the logs to each other,
Okay.
you got to like you level them, level this one, level that one, and then like tack them in position to each other. So you can take
Okay.
a scribe and like scribe the contour of the bottom log onto the top log. So you get a line to cut to with your saw and chisel. So when it
Sure.
sits down, it just hugs that log. You don't have to chink it.
Right.
Um, so you got to have these things called log dogs. This is like a big staple,
Okay.
Uh, yeah, it's just like a giant awful staple. It's just forged tapers. And so I made a bunch of those and stuff out of rebar, practical things.
Yeah.
And then I don't know what the first knife I made was, but like I remember a really early one was I was trying to make a straight razor out of, you know, out of the misguided.
I can't think of a sketchier thing. This is the very first knife I'm ever gonna make
Yeah,
for edged
yeah, yeah,
thing,
yeah.
and then I'm gonna try it out.
I see you've apprehended the comedy of the situation.
So how did it go?
Painful. It was painful when I tried to use that thing.
Were you able to
Uh,
get it thin enough or sharp enough?
no, I made it out of an old file and then
Yeah.
forged it a little bit. Probably it still had teeth on the back. And it had like a deer leg bone from the literal forest right there
Yeah.
for a handle, pinned and it folded and stuff.
Sure.
And man, I tried to scrape my face with it, dude, but it was not happening. Uh,
Yikes.
I still have it somewhere. I would have
Great.
dug it out, but who knows where it's at?
You should tune it up. I bet you can
Yeah,
tune it up now.
I could hollow grind it and actually probably use it now.
Yeah. You could
But
use
yeah,
it
so
like
there was
a
that straight razor,
sure.
and then like the the August Wayne Goddard, uh, rest in peace, who wrote some good books about knife making that could be
Sure.
had at the library, was an influence on me, and like Jim Rasulis. You ever read any of those books, like
Yeah.
Rasulis books?
I have one of them. I think
Okay,
it's it was the Damascus one.
Yeah. So there's some good pattern stuff in there, and
Yeah.
it's worthwhile books to have, especially when you don't know anything.
Yeah, for
Uh,
sure.
yeah, and so I was like, oh, Damascus. Clearly this is the cool thing to do.
Yeah.
And Goddard was making cable Damascus and stuff, so I tried cable Damascus first, just because then I could literally, again, I could drag that out of the woods, and
Right.
I found some good
Just
stuff out there.
rigging cable everywhere.
Yeah, like logging choker cable,
Yeah.
and I found some stuff that actually made some really nice knives. I think I got lucky with that particular cable.
Sweet.
So got into forge welding. That was like hand crank charcoal forge, railroad track anvil.
Oh boy.
Yeah, like douse it in flux.
Yeah.
And some of them turned out not that bad. And then I made some, like, check this out. I don't know, I'll hold it up there. I don't know
Yeah,
how
hold
good
it
you can
up.
see it. That's the first like straight layer laminate Damascus I ever
I
made.
got you.
Is it? You can see where my knives are at the time. Look at that. Look at those plunge lines.
I
Um,
mean, I think that's pretty good for early work.
yeah, I was trying to like 1x42, a double like flat dagger grind onto this thing, but and then
Right.
it's got like lots of weld flaws. This sucker is made out of like hacksaw blades. You know,
Oh, wow, yeah.
yeah, like I just saved up a bunch of smoked hacksaw blades and then like
Sure.
had to grind the paint off and all that. But that was I got to stick for the most part, and yeah, I think that was 2005.
Okay.
Yeah, early '05. Yeah.
So you make it over to Hawaii. You're doing construction work over there. And is there like what happens in Hawaii?
Well, yeah. So I was just still
I mean, did
moonlighting
you
as a
bring
knife maker.
right? Did you bring tools and stuff, or
I
did you?
brought some stuff.
Okay,
Yeah, I and not to the point where I shipped an anvil, because that
sure.
was cost prohibitive. But
Yeah.
like my little 1x42 and stuff, and a couple hammers and things. And then when I got to Hawaii, immediately I was just combing Craigslist and stuff for any smithing tools,
Sure.
which were super rare then. I don't know how it is now, but um, blacksmithing wasn't really on the radar for the good people of Maui.
No.
And so I happened across, well, one of the guys I worked with, he was like, dude, we just came from this yard sale. We're like, there was this guy, he said he was a knife maker and he was moving off the island and selling his stuff. And I was like, I got to get down there. And I get down there and like
Yeah.
pretty much everything was gone already, except there's this anvil that looked like a gumdrop. It might have been
Oh,
about
sure.
40, 50-pound chunk of steel, just round.
Yeah.
But it had a hard top. It was off of like, might have been off some kind of power hammer. I'm not sure.
Interesting.
But I started making that work. And then later I got other anvils. And I would always go pillage. There was a big sugar mill that I would drive past quite a bit, and I'd go rummage around in their dumpster, like a
Sure.
maintenance shop dumpster,
Yeah.
and find like angle iron to build frames for tools, and then like
Great.
scrap electric motors to build grinders. It was very much like just
That's a pretty rugged, cobbled together situation.
absolutely right. Goddard had a section in his book about you can build your own grinder, and I was like, I believe you.
If he says so, then it's possible.
Hey man, I did it. It wasn't a good grinder.
Was that from his what is it, $50 knife maker book?
$50 knife shop.
$50 knife shop.
And his caveat was it's going to be a $50 knife shop if you know how to scrounge, which I did.
Right. Nice.
So there was that. And so after a while, I had a little bit of a shop built up. And we were living about 10 miles up the road from Lahaina, the last place we lived on Maui, and sharing a house with a bunch of surfers. And, I had a shop kind of on the back of the house under a tarp that was just like stapled up to the house or whatever.
Sure.
And those guys would like fix surfboards in one end of our like sharp tarp shop, and I would work on knives in the other end of the tarp shop. That was kind of the status of it. But
yeah, it sounds like those are two things you wouldn't want in the same shop.
swords and boards, man. It's the swords and boards shop.
Yeah.
No,
I'm thinking about the sparks and foam and wood.
Oh yeah. No, it's
maybe somewhat hairy.
I don't think any of us were known for making like the best decisions at that time.
No, probably not.
And then so I was like making I was taking like tension cable from concrete. It's a seismic zone, Hawaii. So when you pour concrete decks, you got to not only have rebar, but you got to like put cable in there inside a plastic sheath and then tension the hell out of it after the
Oh wow.
slab is poured. So it actually like holds the slab together if it starts to crack in an earthquake or whatever. Seismic
Crazy.
cable. And I looked, and the best I could find out was like it's 1095, more or less, music wire, hardenable stuff. So I just grabbed big bundles of that and like forge weld that up and make hunting knives and stuff out of it.
Sure.
It works pretty good, and it was cool because then I could tell the construction guys like, oh, here's a piece of the job site that
Right.
you can use to hunt pigs with. So that worked pretty good. And I did that for a while, and then ended up moving to Oahu and living right down the street from Ken Onion. So then I just brashly walked over and knocked on his door with my crappy knives and was like, here's me, and this is my things that I make. And he took pity on me. And
Did you know who he was before you got there?
yeah, well, like I'd probably had, a Kershaw Ken Onion knife at some point already, because
Okay.
he was big with like Speed Safe,
Sure.
the Kershaw Leak and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then like the Knives Annual would always have. I was always going through those things back then, and they
Sure.
would have everyone's address and like phone number in the
I
back.
know that was gonna be my next question. Did you intentionally move just down the street from him?
No, it just happened. And he
You
wasn't
did.
even the first maker on Oahu that I called. Like I went
Oh, okay.
over to like Stan Fujisaka's house and stuff. But Stan was like in his 80s then. And he's like, man, he was like, you need somebody like young to teach you, because he was
Okay.
starting to get sick. And he referred me to Ken. And then I looked like Ken in the book. I was like, Hui Kelu Street. Like, well, that's like right up, 5 blocks up the hill, like from on
Crazy.
the sidewalk here. So I
Yeah.
just did it, and yeah, he took me under his wing. Super nice guy. And it wasn't until I was like out of his shop till I was like pulling a nice hand sanded finish on things and like, fitting bolsters up to where there was just no gap and stuff like that. Soldering guards, like he taught me some old school stuff.
Sure.
Soldering guards onto like 440C and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but so that was an education. It wasn't really like a blacksmithing, bladesmithing, Damascus thing, but it was what I actually
Yeah.
needed at that time. Was
Sure.
just like, hey, clean up your work, dude, and learn how to grind.
Right.
Yeah, and then coming back to Washington, I came back and actually stayed on the mountain property, me and the wife, just to get back on our mainland feet for like one winter. And that is a tough place to try to be a knife maker over the winter, remote
Oh
eastern
yeah.
Washington. So, the next year we were just like, okay, we need to find a place to rent, and it's got to have a shop. So that's what we did. Then I was just knife making. Like from then on, didn't make a lot of money, per se. And this was like in blade forms days. That's where you would try to like sell
Right.
your EDC that you forged out of 52-100. You'd take it to blade forms and post it there, and you'd get like 250, $300 for it.
Sure.
And you would just try to do that as many times as you could in the month. And then like
Yeah.
if I couldn't, then I guess what, you got to go get a job. And
Right.
I would always just try to work at something where I was learning about metalworking, fabrication, welding. Worked for my artist blacksmith friend on some big jobs that he got in. And over time, it just kind of turned into like even more of an education.
Cool.
And I was just making knives the whole time. I was pretty much full-time knives for a couple of years. Then me and the wife like had a cafe in town for a couple of years. Made a go of it trying to be cafe owner operators.
What kind of food were you cooking?
That was breakfast, like a pretty full menu breakfast. It was
Sure.
like short order cooking,
I got you.
slinging hash, and that was fun. It's you've been a line cook. That's an athletic job. You're running
Yeah.
around, and you're thinking like steps ahead, and you got stuff that's
You're trying to keep a lot in your head
yes, indeed.
and timing and yeah.
And so I enjoyed that, and that was about the time I was starting to make kitchen knives, starting to learn about them.
Okay.
Because as you know, like just because you can make a hunting knife or a Bowie doesn't mean that you're going to make a kitchen knife that's worth beans, um,
Sure.
geometry, all that stuff. I was just starting to learn it then.
So this was then probably around what,
12.
2012?
Yeah, 2012
Interesting.
ish.
It's so interesting. There were so many makers that we know now who all kind of started about, like Don started about that. Don Wynn
Yeah.
started about that time. Um, Yella Hasenberg started about that time. God, I can't remember who I was. I feel like I've talked to a lot of makers who were just like, yeah, I was around 2012 is when I first started.
I wouldn't be
I'm like,
surprised if like Ian Rogers started about then. Do you know?
who?
Ian Rogers.
Oh, Ian Rogers.
Yeah,
Yeah, actually, I think he's also another one.
yeah. Because I
Yeah,
remember he used
for
to
sure.
post like sick stuff on Blade forums too. He was getting into kitchen knife stuff about the same time as me, perhaps.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, back in the Nick Wheeler days of Blade forums,
Sure.
everyone wanted to make spicy hamons like Nick.
Spicy Hamones.
Yeah.
I need
Uh,
to get down and visit Nick. It's been a while since I've seen him.
yeah, you guys are not that far apart, huh?
No, we're like 40 minutes apart from each other.
Oh man. Yeah, you got to go over there and like get him to install his 250 Little Giant and then go use it too.
No, no, I don't want to bother him that way. It's just I just like hanging out and chatting with him.
Yeah,
I
see,
feel like he gets a lot of pressure from people. You should get back into knives or do more knives. And
yeah, with
I
me,
think he
it's,
has a tendency like me to get wrapped up in his head,
oh yeah, I'm sure.
stressed out about it.
Yeah, well, that's also probably why he's so good at knives. He just like,
Yeah,
gotta do every little thing.
yeah. Constantly striving for perfection, or even though perfection doesn't exist, you gotta cut yourself some slack. I've been trying to learn that in the last couple of years. Cut
Yeah,
yourself some slack and give yourself room to continue to progress and learn in the future.
that's
Yeah.
true. And that's a good thing about going to knife shows too, is just being able to see like how incredible some of that work is out there and just get motivated by it.
Yeah, I just came back from Nashville and I get to meet Julie Warinsky and see her
Mm.
engraving work in person. I got to meet um who is it? Simon Nyland
Hmm.
from Finland. He's a folder maker. Michael Walker,
Yeah, Michael Walker.
Delana, um, and even getting to see like Nick Anger's work in person. I mean, there was a lot of talent in that room, honestly. Um, Javier Vaught was
Yeah,
was there.
his stuff is crazy.
Dude, it's bonkers. It's so crazy.
Yeah,
It's just, but yeah, you don't get to. I think that's honestly like that's probably these days. That's probably one of the greater values of going to these shows because so many people can have found a market for themselves through social media and online and email lists and stuff like that. That
yeah,
going to a knife show, it's sales is not much of a justification anymore, but getting hands-on work and meeting and creating those relationships with people is kind of like the bigger opportunity.
right.
I feel like
And
obviously
like,
if you're a massive production company, then yeah, blasting out and selling
right,
like 1,000 or 3,000 knives in 2 or 3 days is great. But
sure,
for small makers like you and me, I think again, who have found their market in through other aspects and other ways, those opportunities to create those relationships are really powerful. Um,
yeah. Honestly, if I think about what it would be like having to make all of my money just by going to knife shows,
right. Or
like,
blade
hell,
forms.
yeah, it's a little bit of a panicky feeling.
Yeah, it's
Like,
anxiety inducing
how would I
for
do that?
sure. Yeah, I think you would do it the same way all those guys were doing it, and they had a real job, and then
And their
most of
wife had
them,
an even better job.
yeah, they all had real jobs, and their wife had good jobs too,
Yep,
and then the knife making was on the side.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think we're pretty fortunate to occupy this space and time that we do.
right. But it is interesting to reflect on. I think a lot of people don't really take that into consideration. Um, no matter what age you are, if you're newer to knife making, that there are some realities that just are unknown that we're, you know, just like even just 10 years ago,
Oh
right?
yeah, yeah. 10 years is like a century in the knife world for sure.
For sure. Are you still close with Ken Onion? You guys chat often?
Not often. I actually did talk to him for a good while just the other day though.
Nice.
I was over visiting Will Stelter in Montana, and Ken just happened to call me up, and so that was good. It was good to catch up with him. Of
Yeah.
course, he's still like on a new kick, designing some more knives and coming out with some production partnership or something. And
Yeah.
so it's cool. He's very much got his hand in still.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
one thing that I really enjoyed kind of developing was like I haven't been to the Words Hammer Inn.
Okay, yeah.
I might maybe I'll go next year. I don't know. It's a little tough for me to get out at the moment, but
For sure.
like Will went,
Yeah.
and then Ken actually went and did a talk there
Right.
this last time, and then they called me up while they were there. It was like, oh hey, this is Will. Look who I got here, type of thing, and
Yeah.
and I was like, oh, here's my teacher meeting me like my protege. So
Right.
it's like he's Will's grand teacher or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it was like this really fun moment, just like
Right.
kumbaya vibes.
Absolutely. That's great. Yeah, Travis Words Hammer is definitely a good time. It's all the time. Really really good makers there sharing some cool information. And again, I think an opportunity those just like going to a show, the hammer-ins are also a great opportunity to kind of bend people's ear, make connections that, so far, possibly up to that point, have only been through the phone or through the, internet, and to kind of make them more real and yeah, that's cool. I'm
Yeah.
hoping to get back to Travis's hammer-in next year. I'll have to reach out to Mr. Quisenberry and see what the possibilities of that are. But
Yeah, I think that's it's a good thing for the knife world shows, hammer-ins, because that in-person interaction, you really garner a better like social graces, feeling of a solidarity,
sure.
like respect for each other.
Yeah.
That gets lost a little bit when everybody's cooped up in their house,
Yeah.
feeling anxious and just disagreeing with each other over social media. So
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's super worthwhile to just get out there, meet people, and have fun conversations.
Yeah, social graces for sure, because I think it's too easy to be behind a keyboard and talk shit instead of saying something to somebody's face. And,
Absolutely.
are you saying stuff just because you're trying to be a troll or because that's actually what you think? And if you're in person, you're probably not going to say stuff that you're not going to troll people in person. I know very few people who like to troll people directly to their faces.
Yeah.
And I think the reality is just like, let's just stop being such dicks to each other.
Well, and the thing is too, like in real life, when if you meet a person like that and you realize, oh, this is a person that likes to just, you know, be a dick and like troll people and to their face,
Yeah.
that's known as like a person I won't be friends or hang out with. And then it's like no
Uh-huh.
problem. But
Right.
on social media, you're like, can you just stop commenting on my stuff? Like,
So before you got into culinary knives, and I think even still now, you do a lot of experimental work. But I remember seeing like your Vorpal swords and all these creative daggers yeah, I feel like I've seen you do some folder work.
yeah.
Um, and it seems like you while you were being productive at the same time you're doing a really great job of being like exploring the various genres and styles and techniques and really trying to find what maybe is a Salem Straub knife. Do you feel like you've found that yet? And what was that journey like for you?
Um, well, that's something that I partly got from Ken, where he was
Okay.
like, he likes to make everything too.
Okay.
He's known for this and that, but he has just made a wide range of stuff. And
Yeah.
he's like, I'd love to go to Japan and learn how to make a tomahagane sword. Like he's down for all of it.
Right.
He's just like, I just get bored if I don't just do whatever the heck I want,
Sure.
to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I've been too. And I feel like certain types of knife making actually inform each other. So if you just
Okay.
specialize in one type of knife, like only you might miss, some alternate ways of thinking about how you could put a knife together, for instance.
Sure.
Like look at like chef knives versus, well, look at like an integral chef knife versus like a takedown fighter, right?
Okay.
I don't want to make a chef knife handle that really comes apart per se, because you can't have stuff getting in there. Who knows?
Right.
I'm not even going to say that's an absolute, but
Yeah, sure.
at least the techniques. You know all about this stuff precisely. Everything involved with, like, you've got damascus next to handle material, and they both need different finishes, and they're both maybe at slightly different levels, and you can't be like getting scratches from one onto the other, and it's all very like super particular.
Yeah.
And so then you can like learn about indexing pins and about slight proud fitting and about like through tang
Right.
with a screw, and like all the takedown techniques you might use on a fighter handle. The only difference is you're gluing it up when you're done.
Right.
But if you want to, you can etch the blade with the handle off of it and stuff like that.
Sure.
You know, as far as correlations between like folder and chef knife work, maybe not as much, but like folders and daggers for sure. I think you're going to be a better dagger maker if you have like the precision and like deliberate execution of a folder maker. When you're thinking
Interesting.
in thou, if you when you
Oh,
start
wow.
being a machinist and like thinking in thou, because like with a folder you could just blow it by like 3 thou on a lock, and then the thing like doesn't work. Um,
Right.
so then as you get,
Jeez, that's such a
yeah,
I feel like that seems like such a slim margin.
I have remade some parts.
Oh my god.
Hopefully they're not like a whole day, but sometimes.
Yeah. Oh my
Um,
god.
so then that's a whole different mindset. And then even now, I probably haven't made a folder in like 2 years. But if I went back
Okay.
and made one today, I would have to be very careful and like shift back into that mindset, and then just like take baby steps. Unlike if I
Sure.
was making them, 10 a year or 20 a year of them,
Right.
because it is so different. But it's really good to have that kind of like degree of finicky planning out and execution of little parts sometimes.
Yeah. I no, I agree. And I don't have any experience actually with, especially when it comes to folders. I have some very rough experience with dagger grinding, and I've made some hunters, uh, but honestly, and I've done a couple takedowns,
Oh,
but
nice.
I don't have. But I am curious, and I'm very interested in learning as many different techniques as possible. And it's funny because when I talk to people about, oh, I'd love to learn how to make a slip joint whittler or something like that, and they're like, "Why do you wanna do that?" Or like, "Oh my god, he's gonna get into the slip joint whittler again." I'm like, "Fuck no, I'm not," but I'm interested in it.
Yeah,
I'm curious about it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's intriguing to me. It's I mean, it would take a long time, obviously, to get to a really high level like some of these guys are, but to have a grasp of the concepts, to have made one or a couple, and to see the potential of how to reincorporate that back into my
Yeah,
chef's knife work, I don't know. I think constantly striving to learn is really important. I think a lot of people do get into a comfort zone, and maybe that works for them. But for me, I want to learn it all. My biggest struggle right now is the free time. To
yes.
be able to do that, the freedom to be able to do that, or also kind of the money side of things, to be able to
Oh
stop
yeah.
and
No, I
drop a
feel
few
you.
$1,000s and take a class with somebody and spend a week with them, really digging deep and getting that knowledge in my
Yeah.
brain.
Oh my goodness, I would take so many classes if I had the time and money for it.
Yeah,
Like I,
someday, man, we'll
yeah,
be there. Well, and I think what's great is you and I have a commodity of sorts to trade potentially with some of those people that have other knowledge skills, which was just like with our Damascus making, our pattern developing skills and design, and I guess, I mean, I think for everybody, like learning how to make Damascus and forging steel, is a journey, but I think a few have really pushed it really hard and really far to continue to try to see where those boundaries are, if there are any. I've been told, I remember when I was first starting out on my own back in 2011 and I'm sorry, 2012 13. Um I was like playing with some drawings and I was showing a maker friend at the time, and he's like, "I don't know why you do all those drawings. Every pattern that's ever been made has been made." And I'm like, "What?" And he's repeating. I was like, "That doesn't even make sense."
Yeah.
And I know that pattern welded to steel has been created. It goes back as far as like I think it like 500 BC from the
Yeah.
Celts, possibly
Yeah.
even farther. Um,
Yeah. The amount of
and
stuff that's been done
yeah.
is crazy, and a lot of it we'll never even know.
Oh, sure, it's
What
just
somebody did
lost
that one time,
lost
or
to the dirt.
yeah.
Yeah. Or to oxidation.
Yep.
Yeah. Oxygen, the great destroyer.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I'm a
But
little bit jealous
yeah, go
of
ahead.
bronze for that reason sometimes.
Sure. Yeah. So, I'm curious, like, where I don't know. I wanna hear more about your because obviously, like I said, I think you're one of the most creative and talented, like, not only outside of the box pattern designer and creator, but also regarding your welding techniques are I think you've dabbled and played enough to be like to the point where you're like, I think I know where I can improve on this, or I think I
Yeah.
know, yeah, like what I can do to make this more efficient for me, and the way I work, and like I guess what's a major kind of can't think of the word right now, but like a starting or not a starting point, but a point in your journey where you're like all of a sudden you're like it clicked and you started to see things and you just started diving down a rabbit hole
Like a
and
watershed moment.
yeah, sure, yeah,
Um, yeah, I've had probably a few of those, but then I've also had like uh, just really incremental progress.
mm,
And I think it takes maybe 10 or 20 steps of incremental progress where you're not really like noticing necessarily that you're progressing a lot before
right,
you can have one of those click moments. And
sure,
then maybe like 5 or 10 other things that you learned, and then you're like, oh, this is now possible because of that other little thing that
right,
I learned or whatever.
yeah,
But for me, it was when I was starting out, like I say, it was Ursulis, Goddard, guys that I was reading about pattern welding, and they were all
yeah,
very like and flux and 50% reduction to get a good weld, and
sure,
just all of that old school stuff. And those guys were all like straight layer guys, uh, with the caveat of cable, but they weren't mosaic guys
sure,
really. And there was mosaic work being done at the time, but you just couldn't find like books about it and things like that. You would just
hmm,
see something in Knives Illustrated and be like, "What? Like,
right,
oh, okay." and
yeah,
you'd just be clueless about it. And so when I was just learning straight layer patterns, you work your way through ladder and then like twist and stuff. And I was at that level for a bit, and then it started to be like, well, what was the next cool thing to go for? Was gonna be like Turkish twist. I
okay,
I remember feeling like that was like the clear like advanced level to go to. It was like multi
hmm,
bar stuff,
sure,
and so I started fooling with that. And I remember, gosh, seeing like, well, what year was that? Like 2012 or 13, I had gotten a little giant finally.
okay,
And so then I was able to actually kind of like, make some strides in pattern welding, because then all of a sudden I had like a force multiplier and I hadn't before. And, uh, and so I was, gosh, I have a ladder, a Crewforge V 15 and 20 ladder chef in my kitchen that I made in like 2013. And I want to regrind it. It's too thick, but you know, it works well enough. Um,
sure,
and then so then it was like, well, let's learn how to do Turkish. I remember Nick Wheeler had done like, and he never finished it. if you're listening, Nick, here's what you should do. You got to finish that Turkish whip on blade forms. It's not too late. It's only been 12
it's
years.
Never too late. It's never too late.
Yeah, it's never too late. But anyway, no, I think that gave me the idea. Let's try to make Turkish twist because he showed how to do it. So I went for that. I was making like 4-bar stuff. Again, just welding it with flux and stuff, hand welding flux, like 4-bar stuff. And then, because I was afraid to like blow it apart on the power hammer, I was at that level where I could do some pattern welding, but I was like afraid to like take something that had much work in it and hit it very hard.
Sure.
I remember, I met you in 2014, I want to say, at Dave Leish's Hammer In, and then like the first Seattle show that Daniel put on.
Yeah.
And I wasn't really.
I remember you walking around with your little suitcase.
Yeah, man.
Like, who's this guy?
You were like, who's this dude? He's wearing a suit and he's got a suitcase. What the hell? I had my banjo in the truck too, man. I was like full on a iconoclast there. But yeah, I wasn't doing like mosaics at the time. I remember seeing your knives; they look really good. I think you won something, right?
Did
you get best chef at that show?
Best chef and People's Choice.
Yeah, that's dope.
At that show.
And then I had tons of fun at the Hammer In. I remember you were there cutting onions and stuff with a knife without a handle.
Yeah.
And then like me and Haley were talking to you there at your chopping table about chef knives and stuff.
Right. Yeah.
And I was watching Dave, hammer on one of his big wolf hammers, some mosaic that he was doing a demo. I was just looking at him like, man, how much like time does he have into that billet? And he's just going for it. He's hitting that stuff. Like there's no fear in his approach. And I was like, well, that's clearly what to aim for, having pattern welded steel that's already complex, but just having all of the faith in your welds to the point where you could just blast it in pretty much any direction, given enough heat or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, gosh, I don't remember like what my first mosaics were. I think I had worked my way up through like Merovingian multi-bar, and I was doing a lot of like twisted W's multi-bars. That was my favorite pattern for a little while, was that like explosion multi-bar.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I don't know. I think I watched like Ed Caffrey's mosaic video, and I've seen like, it's a little bit dated, but there's a lot of good info in it,
Sure. Okay.
And then I was probably watching like Bruce Bump maybe put W's together and then split it for a feather and stuff around that time. That blade form on blade form is probably where I learned W's. But then of course, and then Mick Maxon with his explosion W's, work in progress. I think then I was like, okay, we're gonna try to make some explosion or whatever.
Sure.
But kind of early on, I wasn't really interested in copying anybody's steel. Mm-hmm. I wanted to learn the techniques and then just change a few things in my starting billet and then just make something different. Like I never have wanted to copy anybody.
Right.
It feels a little distasteful, but probably just my ego won't let me do that.
Sure.
It's like, oh, you can do your own thing.
Right.
And so then I started fooling around with, I think one of my early patterns was, Bill Poor makes it now. I taught that to him. It's called Mosaic, the pine cone mosaic. It's got like little kind of leaf looking shapes with like bent crosses in between and stuff. And that was based on a pretty basic starting stack. I had a lot of fun with that one. So then I'm like, let's look at Filicetti's work and then it's try to use some of his stuff, but a little bit different. Sure. I studied his work a lot. Definitely I was looking at your stuff. Trying to think, what were you doing at that time? You were doing like turning tides and stuff a lot then, I think.
I was doing turning tides. I think I was doing, that's when I first did my Dragon's Fire mosaic.
Yeah.
I was really proud of that one.
Yeah, I remember I think you had one of those blades at Eugene one time looking at that.
Yeah, I had a pair of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's when I was like, okay. So with finishing, I had been etching. This is a whole separate category, as you'll know. But
Yes.
you want to talk about like how's 10 years going to change, going to shift everyone's paradigm on a thing like etching in the knife world.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I started out making Damascus, it was like ferric chloride all the way, 4-to-1. Don't burn it, but it's probably going to look gross when you pull it out anyway.
Sure.
Shine it up to the extent that you can. And it's going to still look kind of gray and muddy. And
Yeah.
then, like, if you want to have any contrast, like boil it, to set the oxides and stuff. It was a big secret. You could boil it to set the oxides.
Boil it in just hot water,
I forget even.
or
It's
was
been
it
so
with
long.
baking
It
soda?
was it was like boil it in baking soda water, and then if you're careful, you
Sure.
could shine it up a little bit afterwards without screwing up your darks.
Sure.
But then it went to, and then I was following like Eduardo Berardo,
Okay.
good South American maker. I learned a few things from that dude. And then some of the other South American guys, CAS brothers were
Yeah.
making stuff that was really cool then already. And those guys were all, and Rodrigo Sfredo, my number one hero.
Your number
Um,
one. Yeah, he's
yeah,
pretty incredible.
yeah,
He's
always
pretty
always the
incredible.
fanboy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. He just took like forging Damascus integrals, all that stuff, and just put it like unapologetically front and center, and was like, "This is the badass thing,"
Yeah.
out of like all of forging. Here's how you make it into a high art.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, huge role model there. But so those guys were all Parkerizing, and then like using that for the black contrast and all the lows. They'd etch a little deeper and Parkerize, and then skim
Sure.
over it to get your brights back. And then like the DeRosers was doing that, so I would talk to them a lot. I've been friends with them for a while, and they went and studied with Rodrigo,
Okay.
and so I picked their brains about Parkerizing, and I did that for a while, and it worked out. But it's not perfect, and
Sure.
I've never been able to satisfy myself that it's food safe. I'm not going to go out there and say like, call anyone out for doing it, but I just never for
Yeah.
myself was able to find
Yeah.
information that made me rest easy about that being on a chef knife blade.
Yeah.
So I needed something else. So then I was like, I think I looked at yours and I was like, oh, coffee. So I knew that like Euro makers had been doing it.
Sure.
Like Vero had been doing it for a while, for instance. And then like Eric Markman probably already knew about it. And I remember being like, coffee, well, that's gonna wear right off. But then after I saw in person how nice and black it could be, I'm like, okay, we're gonna go down that rabbit hole. And I'm still liking the coffee finish, for instance.
Yeah.
So there was that, you got to level up on etching, you got to level up on, your idea of what can be done,
Sure.
and just look at a lot of work and like learn things from that. Spend a ton of time in your own shop just trying to do it all,
Mm-hmm.
and experiment with new ideas. And sometimes they just end up as super plain or boring or disappointing end grains that just kind of end up on the floor, or you
Oh,
really
I've
got
had
to
a few of
scratch
those.
your head about like how can I use this unplanned steel to make something that's still really cool, which is
Yeah.
also super handy sometimes because you learn something from that.
If you're paying attention, you're learning. I
Yeah,
always say the reason I call it seeing through Damascus patterns. I can see through so many different patterns, um, and understand how they're made is because of how many mistakes I've made, and trying to understand how I made that mistake,
sure.
and then trying to figure out how to make use of that mistake to create something interesting in the future.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well,
Yeah.
you ever have a pattern where you've done that, right? You're
Sure.
trying to get one thing, and then it came out to be a bit different of a thing.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
it was a thing that you could still use, and so you regroup and you come up with a new pattern based on what you got in your hand.
Mm-hmm.
That turns out cool, and you post it. Hashtag crushed it. Hashtag this is what I call this super intentional Damascus.
Yeah.
And then somebody's like, oh, can you make me one like that? You ever have to recreate something and have a little trouble creating that mistake again?
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
I have.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for a while when I was doing my customs, I made the mistake of saying that I could basically recreate any pattern that I've made before. Um, but I forget about some of those happy accidents, or even what I think I'm doing to create that ends up being something else that was an
Yeah,
accident. And
yeah,
so having to go through, honestly, I've gone on some patterns, I've done upwards of 3 or 4 iterations to try to get that pattern right,
yeah. No, that
which
makes all the
is
sense.
material and time intensive, but I mean, it's my mistake for saying that I could do it again. Um, but
Well,
I
and
also, again, still learn from that experience,
yeah.
especially when it's those things that are like happy accidents. And I'm like, well, if that's not how I did that, how the fuck did I actually do that?
Oh, totally. I
And then
have called myself down many a time for not actually taking notes sometimes because I'm like, oh, I did it once. Like, of course I could just remember it. My mind is like a steel trap. And then, 2 years later, I'm like, what did I do there?
right.
I've actually gone one time. I had to dig back through my end cuts
Oh,
because
wow.
I got like a bucket of end cuts over by the chop
Sure.
saw, right?
Yeah.
And like I had to dig to like the right strata
Hmm.
in the end cut bucket, and then
Right.
like look for the booger ends that look like they might be that pattern, and then
Yeah.
polish them up and etch them all just to look at the steps. And then I got
Yeah.
it back from doing that,
Oh, wow.
but it was it was a humbling moment.
Yeah. I think one maker, who is it? Gary House. I remember talking to him, and he makes pattern boards every single time.
Smart
His
man.
end cuts, he cleans it up, and he puts it on a thing, and then he gets another one. It's right next
Yeah,
to it, and so on and so forth. And
yeah,
he
because you
makes
got
notes,
all
and
the end cuts. Might as
yeah,
well. I just, I got a couple of guys like I'll save my end cuts if they're anything fancy, and I'll just like send them to them to make bottle openers or whatever after a while.
sure,
So I
yeah,
am kicking around too much. But I
yeah.
do. I try to like do a much better job of like taking end etch photographs now.
Oh, nice. That's good.
Uh, and actually, I'm documenting my work a whole lot more now. For Instagram and stuff, but
Yeah,
even more so for YouTube.
sure.
So I can watch my own YouTube video to learn how to make my own pattern if I need to now.
There you go. Yeah, I've seen that. You've been doing a lot more. I mean, obviously intensive, like video follow-alongs and stuff of some of your builds and your pattern developments. Tell me
Yeah,
more about that.
it gets a little bit in depth for sure. It's a lot like knife making. You got to figure out when you get into it, or well, continue figuring it out the farther you get through it. Like, what kind of a
Sure.
knife maker am I? What are my goals here? Where do I see
Yeah.
myself going? Same thing with YouTube. You know, you might make YouTube and have channels that you like, that you watch. You learn by watching it, editing and stuff, and pacing, and you pick up cues that you might use in making your own content. Um,
Okay.
and I do that now intentionally. I just watch, what's the smooth ways of making videos that I like to see in people's stuff.
Sure.
Um, and so you become kind of a collage of your influences.
Right.
Um, and for me, a lot of the guys out there, like, you ever watch like This Old Tony?
No, I've
Okay,
never
that's
heard
a
of that.
good example. Well, he's a guy that will do like a 10 to 20-minute video a lot of the
Okay.
time. And it'll be on whatever project. A lot of it is involving machining and fabrication. It might be a chainsaw go-kart for his kid,
Okay.
or he might he might be working on one of his machines, fitting a CNC controller. He's a very smart guy,
Sure.
but it's all interspersed with humor and like little funny editing tricks and stuff. And it's
Yeah.
very entertaining for anyone to watch, I would say.
Okay.
I'm watching it because I love the machining content, but
Right.
you go down through the comments, you see tons of guys that they're not into that stuff at all. They just watch it because it's funny, it's entertaining, it's a good way to
Sure.
pass 10, 20 minutes. I'm not going to be that guy. I'm going to be that guy that bores you to tears unless you're watching it to learn how to do it. And
Right.
I've made my peace with that. That said, I still
You
do
do have
have
a lot
to.
of great quips, though, I will say.
Well, uh,
I love your quips.
even a blind pig finds an acorn every now and then, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
That's good.
but the main thing that I always try to stay conscious of is when is it too much? When have I repeated this information 3 or 4 times in the same video? That's probably
Sure.
too much.
Yeah.
Um, So yeah, and a lot of it is like, well, maybe we're going to do like a 5, 6 part series on making a this particular pattern and then making a knife out of it, right?
Sure.
And we show all the power hammer work. I don't speed it all up. I will
Oh,
show
cool.
like a whole heat here and there, so you get an idea of like the rhythm at the hammer, and like how it looks when you're tumbling the steel and stuff,
Yeah.
and because all of that is informative. It's a lot more
Is it-
like actually being there with your teacher
Yeah.
than viewing like an edited uh, like a product, an instructional product.
Yeah. Well, I think
Um,
that's yeah, I think I 100% agree with you, and I think a lot of videos usually speed up through that stuff, but for like I know for myself, I'm a very kinesthetic learner, and I learn a ton by simply observing. I pick up a lot of nuance. Now, obviously, it's not the same as being there in person, but there's still a lot to pick up. And like I love Alex Steele's videos, and I think they're a lot of fun. I think they're
yeah,
more, more on the entertainment side of things, but there's still a lot of great information there. But when you do speed through that stuff, you kind of miss out on some of that nuance. But he has his
yeah,
direction that he's taking those videos versus you doing more kind of in-depth
yeah.
educational stuff.
And actually, Alec is probably the example that I should have used, because he's a really good one to look at for the contrast between
Mm,
one style of YouTube and another.
yeah,
Like you say, it's more like entertainment YouTube. It's educational, and you are gonna kind of get oriented at least into bladesmithing a bit from watching it,
yeah,
but you're not really gonna learn the ins and outs of how to make what he's making.
sure,
Um, but then again, a lot of people would be dropping out, and he wouldn't have as many viewers if he was, straight like Damascus core, nerd status.
right,
Um, so again, it's just like I like to watch Alec now and then. I like to watch Will Stelter's channel. Will's a
yeah,
little bit more on the nerdier side, like me, but
yeah,
like he's kind of halfway in between, maybe. Um, but it's just been like I've had to kind of find like what kind of content create. Like, why am I doing it? What are my goals here?
yeah,
And it's really to just provide a community service foremost,
yeah,
and because I just like doing it, like it's fun teaching.
for sure. Well, and I guess that gets into another aspect of I'm sure you get pushback about some of the educational stuff that you share. I know I definitely do. And I'm curious what your take is on kind of this new information economy that we have, um, where there is a lot of really good information available if you look for it, especially some of it you have to dig a bit. But if somebody wants to get started, they can find a lot of great information on making knives, making Damascus, making integrals, making folders. There's YouTube channels for all that kind of stuff out there.
Yeah,
And I know that a lot of older, even honestly, being at this knife show, there were some makers that I was talking to who kind of come from that kind of older mindset. Not necessarily that it's negative or bad, but from a paradigm where it's like you don't share that stuff. You
right.
just don't. And so I'm curious what you think about
No,
all of that
I very
and
much had.
how you decide what you share and what you
Yeah,
keep to yourself. Yeah.
that's a good topic. I've had very similar experiences. Some of the older pattern welders, I won't name any names, but I've definitely been advised, a few times, more than a few times, that it's dumb to make all that stuff just available across the board,
Sure.
and for a range of reasons, but probably the foremost one is like offshore competition. Oh, the Pakistani makers are going to learn how to do this stuff. They're going to, blow us all out of the water. It's like, and I just don't follow that line of reasoning really.
No.
Um, I don't think they have the economics to do that stuff over there. They don't have the material to do that stuff. They're great
Both.
craftsmen to the
I
extent
agree.
that they have the resources available to them.
Sure.
And frankly, like they were pattern welding over there when we didn't even know how.
Right.
Like, so, um, like I have no bias against them. If anything, like I look up to work from that part of the world, older work in particular. But um,
Absolutely.
I've actually talked to some of those. I'll get like guys slide into my DMs. Hey, dear sir, would you like to buy my high quality Damascus hunting swords or whatever from Wazirabad? And
Sure.
I'm just like, you're gonna try to sell like ice to an Eskimo, huh? It doesn't make any sense, man. But occasionally I'll engage them, and I've had guys from Iran or something reach out and be like, "How do you do this one thing?" And maybe not every time, but definitely I've been like, "Oh, here's what I would do," and what do you have at your disposal? What do you use? I've gotten into this stuff with a few of them, and they're nice guys. They're just trying
Sure.
to make a living like we are, and they
Right.
they face the same technical problems that we face and stuff. And
Yeah.
I'm sure it's a very interesting life, trying to make mosaics with nothing but like a heap of coal and like a power hammer buried in the dirt, that you're
Yeah.
sitting and working at. So I don't think what I'm trying to say is I have all the respect in the world for those guys, but I don't think they're like coming after us anytime soon
No. No,
on a
I
meaning
agree.
on a
I'm right there
meaningful
with you.
level.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect, and then the other thing is I figure one of my favorite sayings about it is a rising tide lifts all boats.
Sure.
No, the cooler the work is that's being done out there, the more we catch the attention of the public in general, I think, and probably a
Sure.
bigger market share.
Yeah.
Um, so there's that to think about. And then also, purely for selfish reasons, I think I never want to stagnate. I don't want to get to this place where, here's my 5 patterns that I'm known for making. And, if you want a knife in that pattern, you got to come to me for this particular kind of Damascus or whatever. And I don't even like making the same pattern twice if I can help it.
Sure.
Like twice is a stretch. Uh, and so I figure as long as I'm a moving target, no one's going to catch up to me at my own game,
Yep.
regardless of whether I'm sharing it with them or not. And the only way to beat me at making Damascus, having learned from me, is to make something cooler than I'm making, not to make the same thing as me.
Right.
You, Maybe you could use my ideas and make something cooler, but then I'm gonna learn from that. So again, you're not gonna catch me. Like,
Right.
I'm a little bit competitive about it like that, and not in an unwholesome way, but just in a way of
Sure.
like, you need some you need motivation, and you got to find it where you can, and
Mhm.
it's all too easy to burn out. So you got to keep your hand in and like really force yourself force yourself to keep moving and trying to innovate. Um, I think that, I mean, you asked me. I'm going to paraphrase here
Sure.
because coffee, but like what kind of have I found, like what's a Salem Straub knife, or like what is my
Mm.
style,
Mhm.
where am I getting to? And I don't feel the need to have. It's kind of a cliche in the knife world to be like, oh, this guy, you could tell one of his knives by looking at it from across the room.
Sure.
And a lot of people talk that up like that's a good thing. And I'm not saying it's not, but it's just not the most important thing to me. If that
Sure.
quality exists in my work, great, I'm happy about it. But what I'd rather be doing is just continually progressing. Whether it's like a new pattern or kind of knife I haven't tried before. I mean, if
Yeah.
someone's eye is good enough to see the same lines in one of my chef knives as like in a folder that I might make, well, that's pretty cool. But I wouldn't expect it. You know,
Sure.
um, to me, it's constant learning and constant innovation on like whatever little level I can manage it. I would love for that to be seen as kind of like the calling card of my work. You know.
Right. I like that. Yeah, I 100% agree with you, and though in regards to um the the rising tide raises all ships, and that the more visibility, whoever it's coming from, that is generated for the craft of custom knife making in general, the better.
Yeah,
And even if it's just people who are watching Alex Steele for entertainment, the fact that they now know that that is a thing that people are doing in real life is really powerful.
for sure.
And I mean, obviously, there are millions of them watching his work, watching his content. And when it comes to sharing knowledge and information, I again I agree with you. I'm constantly actually I've said this before, but part of the reason I share what I share is from a selfish perspective, that I'm curious to see what other people will do with it, so that then I see, I get re-inspired, or I see it one little small tweak or something, even if it's just they do all the same steps, but it's just
Yeah.
different organization of steel in the original stack. And I could see where that happened. And I'm like, "Ooh, that's cool. I like that." That just happened to me
Yeah.
recently. And I was like, I want to play with that now. And yeah,
Isn't it
so
amazing though how that can happen? How like your exact pattern copied exactly by someone, except for like a slightly different something at the start, just makes it look
yeah.
way different.
Yeah, the order of operation stays the same, but the original stack can change so much. And it's just like you just don't know until you see it or have done it, and you see where different lines connect with each other and stuff, and you're like,
Yeah.
"Oh," and that gives you a new idea. And I think I'm right there with you. Like, um, I've kind of gotten away from repeatedly making or repeating patterns that I've made before for custom orders, and part of that's because I've gotten away from doing custom orders a bit,
Yeah.
and more of it's been a lot more of my kind of own personal exploration. And I think along the same lines as you is I'm curious of trying to find the bottom of the well, or whatever you want to call it. I want to see where where's the ceiling. Is there a ceiling? I don't
Yeah.
know, but I'm going to try to see if there is, and I'm just going to keep doing weird stuff and playing with new things, and I'm going to make mistakes, but I'm going to learn from those mistakes. And also just watching people. Like, I love seeing your work. I love seeing especially like Jason Morrissey's work.
Yeah.
I love watching Charlie Ellis and what he's playing around with. Will Stelter is doing really fun, creative stuff.
It sure is.
Especially when he did those tiles with all those little feathers. I'm like, yes,
This
finally.
guy, yeah.
I've been wanting to see somebody take feather and use it as an element in an
Yeah.
overall pattern, like farther down the road, and I've
Yeah. To
never
build
seen it
out
before
mosaic.
him.
It's
Yeah,
so cool.
it's so good. And so, yeah, I'm right there with you, and I think that I don't know. It is, and some people, like, maybe those 5 patterns is all they got, and it's because they've made, whatever small little twist on how the starting process is, or instead of forging on a perfect bias, just forging on a slight partial bias or something like that. I don't know, whatever it is, and that's all they got. And I feel sometimes I get really I can be like almost kind of, I don't know. I'm not trying to be mean, but it's like I'm like, you're just resting on your laurels. Like, let's keep fucking working, man. But
Yeah.
then sometimes, like, that's that's just I think the reality is people just need to be aware of where they're at, and I got to keep that perspective, because sometimes that's just not where people are at, and that's not what they're trying to do. And some people are getting into this game late in life after they've had a full-on career and kids and everything, and
Yeah.
they're hitting it at 50 or 60 years old.
Right. Or
And
maybe they're
so
trying to do it while having that career and kids and
yeah.
stuff. And there's just not a whole lot of excess random access memory to come up with new things.
Right, energy, excess time,
Yeah.
especially. Yeah, yeah, cool. um We have some questions that have popped up in the stream. We kind of lightly touched on some of the stuff, but this first one is from Michael Poor, who's a big fan. He is asking, I remember reading, maybe on Blade forums, that you use a specific acid to remove fire scale for prepping steel that you can't grind, like the interior chains of a Zangier pattern. And he's
Yeah.
curious if you could, I guess,
Yes.
help him remember what that is.
I'll endeavor to elucidate. Uh,
Please.
First of all, what's up, Mike? Mike's just over there in coastal Washington, I do believe.
Yeah, he's about an hour and a half north of me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so yes, I did talk about. So pickling is kind of the term that you want to look for there for chemically removing scale from steel, for instance. And there's different things that you could use to pickle. For Zangier, it's similar to jelly roll in that you roll it up hot, or you bend it up hot, and you just have a lot of small kind of crevices in there that you might have to clean out. to get the cleanest welds possible. So there's a few things you use, but I was using, I think in probably what you saw was sodium bisulfate, and that is a product that you can find really in big box stores in the pool section, called pH Down.
Oh, yeah.
It's an
Steve
acidic.
Culver uses that as well.
Yeah, it's good stuff. It's generally in powder form, so you can mix it to whatever strength you like. Once you kind of get a feel for what works for you, um, it is less. You can use just straight up muriatic acid, which some guys do too. Like Greg Vereshnikov, I think, just use straight up muriatic, um, or like Will Brigham uses muriatic a lot in what he does for this and that.
Sure.
Personally, I hate the stuff. Um,
Pretty gnarly.
the fumes are gnarly. I don't want them in my shop even a little bit. So anytime I'm using muriatic, I'm doing it outdoors and I'm staying out of that fume plume. Because if you walk through like even the fumes with an open mouth, like that's
It's gross.
yeah, it's
And
not good. Uh, so I pH Down is better, on that score for sure. It's not quite as aggressive, but then again, it's a little bit safer because of that. Even if you mix it
okay,
up fairly strong, you could walk away and leave the steel in there for a few hours and come back and not have like over pickled it.
I got
Uh,
you.
yeah, and then you can like toothbrush it off a little bit and not worry about getting like speckled with muriatic acid while you're even toothbrush. It's just not gnarly on that level.
Yeah,
Um, so I like that. I like that stuff pretty good. And then another thing that I have done, uh, in addition to that, maybe you got a little bit of scale down in there that was a little bit too crusty for it to really get to. I'll take it over and I'll sandblast.
mm,
Sandblasting is a good way to kind of get at stuff like that sometimes.
someday I'll be part of the sandblasting club.
Yeah, it's pretty nice sometimes to have.
Yeah,
It does take scale right off. And then for any residual scale that I haven't managed to pickle and or sandblast off, I'm also going to trust Forge Atmosphere a little bit to help me clean it up the rest of the way.
sure.
Just dial a real fuel rich and leave it in there for a while.
Right. All right. I got a couple follow-ups for you. First off, can you what when using that pH down, can you recall your typical mixture ratio and then times that you're using to pickle? Um and
It's been a
obviously it'll
while.
probably vary since vary based on temperature of the solution, but
Yeah. Oh, actually, I just remembered there's another thing that you could use too. Uh, it's a different kind of phosphoric acid.
sure.
That's another like stripper product that you could get like in Home Depot, for instance.
Right.
I think it's more.
That's one that's one I use often.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
pretty good too. Um, but as far as that pH down, I mix it pretty stiff. Like I get a scoop, and do like a scoop and like 2 scoops water, like 1 to 2, by volume,
Okay.
and then stir it up. And then you could leave it in. If it's that strong, you could put a bar of steel down in there, and you'll see it like foam a little bit
Okay.
as it's eating that scale some.
Sure.
And you can still leave it in there, 2-3 hours. Have a look. It's not gonna like melt through the steel aggressively.
Does it eat the steel or at all, or is it mostly focused on the forge scale?
I feel like if you left it in there, if it was like warm in the shop, if it was in the summer and you left it in there like all night and forgot about it, it might
Sure.
hit it a little bit, but I don't
Okay.
think it would destroy it like muriatic might.
I got you.
So again, it's safer.
Sure. Goes a little bit slower. Yeah, and that
Yep.
phosphoric acid, it's usually what is it? Clean Strip is the
Yeah.
brand that I see at either Lowe's or Home Depot, and um, I usually cut the solution. Like for say, I have like a 3 foot tall container that's I think it's 3 inches in diameter, and which holds about a gallon and a half. But I'm only putting like maybe a pint in
Oh yeah.
with that. But I usually try to time my steel too so that I'm leaving it in overnight.
Right.
And but the next day, like you said, like with the toothbrush, you can just kind of scrub it right off. You don't have to do anything super aggressive like a wire wheel or anything. Um, although I do sometimes find that if the forge scale is really heavy on some parts, it won't get through it. It'll
Yeah.
clean off like 95%. And then there's just like a few super cruddy spots that it just couldn't get through everything.
Yeah.
Um, which is kind of a drag because it just means a little bit more work for me. But anyways, and then oh shit, I can't remember my other follow-up question. I lost it. But we do have more questions here. So Mike's also saying that he loves the video content that you're putting out, and he's a big fan.
I do
Um,
appreciate that.
let's see. Mike is on fire. He says, all right, so he's got
I
another
know.
one. He says
This
Salem
guy can
shared,
type fast.
yeah.
I'm impressed.
Let's see. Salem shared the pine cone pattern on Facebook when Bill learned it. We
Yeah.
have that information, but such a small number of people who will then take the information and make something with it. Yeah, that's definitely another thing to take into consideration about the fear of sharing knowledge. Is like you still got to do all the work. People give
Yeah.
me all kinds of props. You're
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
thank you
Yeah.
so much for sharing, and like I understand that to a point, but at the same time, I'm like, you still had to do it all. There's
Yeah.
plenty of places to fuck up and make mistakes and things to go
Yeah.
bad or sideways all
That is
along
a
that journey.
that's a big part of it. In a way, it's almost like some of these patterns, the more labor intensive ones, hey, if somebody's got the shop and the chops to keep up and actually make that pattern happen,
Right.
like I have more respect for a person like that than I probably do for, the great majority of the public at large. And so I'd
Yeah.
almost rather share stuff with a dude like that.
Sure.
And like even Bill Poor, he makes a couple of my patterns and sells them. And I never have had a problem with that. He's always been very respectful about it and stuff. And I'm just glad. I'm happy to see it because he's cleaned him up nice. He makes nice, crisp
Sure.
versions. I like seeing that go out into the world. It's
Yeah.
really cool.
We have a question here again from Mr. Michael Poor. This is on the Patreon. If
Yeah.
anybody is interested in being part of by the way, I'll just throw this in real quick. If anybody listening to this later on, after it goes public, if you want to be part of the conversation, you want to be able to ask these questions, go over to the Patreon, sign up, and join at the illuminated individual level, and we can talk and you can ask direct questions to talented makers like Salem. uh, and multiple. Obviously, Michael Poor is on fire. All right, this other one from Mike. He says, when putting multi bars together, do you scarf the joint or do you just face 90-degree surfaces and set the welds vertically?
Uh,
So
I'm
I'm
pretty sure. Yeah, I think I got it.
like a standard multi
Just
bar, like your
yeah,
Turkish
like
twist or
4 bars,
something.
for instance. Hit them
Yeah,
from the top, right? Boom.
yeah,
Um, yeah, it's definitely just set them on top of each other. I tack weld them, little MIG
right.
tacks, and
So the
then
cross section is like a square, though. It's not like a parallelogram.
the
So for a
well,
partial scarf.
looking at the end of the cross section, it's just going to be 4 little cubes set on top of each other.
Sure.
Um, to be basic about it, if you wanted to, make it little easier on yourself, particularly if you're going to do like 8 or 10 bars or something more um, involved, then you can forge those bars into a rectangular cross section. So maybe like 3/8 to a half-inch
Right.
thick and maybe like 3/4 inch wide, just so
Yeah.
you get more of a meeting surface, and so your stack like isn't so tall and your aspect ratio isn't so likely to buckle when you hit it.
Sure.
Um, so definitely try that. Maybe if you're just getting into it or you got a tall, because sometimes they just get like really tall and they want to buckle, and once that sucker buckles, like forget it,
Oh
dude.
my god. That's a death nail.
Yeah.
Almost 100% of the time.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. We got another question from Kevin Cunningham Knives. Uh um what impact has the pantograph had on your work? Do you think there are possibilities using it for Damascus patterns, or is it best suited for handles and softer materials?
That's a good question. So it does have some application in pattern welding potentially, and I have used it a little bit there. Um, it's a light duty machine as far as doing any kind of um, ambitious milling with it. So in keeping with the overarching principles of machining, it's always good to remember to start with the machine that's going to do the bulk of the work the most efficiently, and then finish with the machine that is going to have to do the smallest amount of work but can be the most precise.
Mm.
And the pantograph very much falls into that last category of machine. So if you're going to use it in steel, and you know how steel goes, a lot of the time you build it's going to need to be like half an inch thick.
Right.
Uh, at least if you're doing like a final like multi-tile sideways upset weld kind of
Sure.
assembly. So you're gonna have to multi pass your way on down through there. You're not just gonna like
Yeah.
side cut, half of an inch depth of cut,
What?
yeah, with a
So
little
what,
three
like five
sixteenths end
thousandths
mill.
of jet?
I think you can pull 10,
10. Okay.
yeah, but that's 50 passes.
Yeah,
So
that's a lot.
get a podcast on, listen to Knife Talk, and fire up the shop vac just to get a
Yeah.
little slivers away from your hand, and you're gonna be there like half a day. Um,
Yowza.
Yeah, so in terms of like puzzle fitting pieces of like Damascus together and stuff, I've tried it with that and it does work. It's very labor intensive and slow. So I think that if a person was gonna want to specialize in that kind of work, you'd be better served going to like a wire EDM
Mm.
probably, or maybe
Wow.
even water jet, something like that.
Sure.
Because it's again, it just takes forever, especially the more intricate your little contours and stuff, the smaller of an end mill that you're going to need, and the less you can load it up, the more it's going to flex.
Hmm.
So, like I've done a keyhole on pantograph, and it's just not my favorite way to do it. I have a pantograph, but I still hand fit them because it's to me it's just not economical.
Sure.
But so I did these knives. Maybe it was last year, where I like keyhole fit the one Damascus to another Damascus, and they had like keyhole end caps in the steel onto
Oh
like
yeah,
multi bar.
I remember that.
And my concept was to do that on the pantograph to start with, and I did one of them on the pantograph, and I was like, I got to do four more or like three more. Like forget that. And I just like went to super old school, like scribe it out and grind to the line type of thing, and it worked
Yeah.
just fine.
Yeah.
um, but for handle work, it's wonderful. This morning, what I was doing, it's on my Instagram story, I do believe, was just routing out some little pieces for like dichrolam inlay into a G10 handle frame spine. It's great for that kind of stuff, cutting synthetics,
Sure.
and doing a little inlay like that. And I'm one of these guys like I love nice like burl handle wood, exotic materials to the point where I have difficulty throwing my scrap away. I got a big drawer just full of fancy scrap that's too small for
Yeah.
knife handles. And I had that drawer for years before I ever got a pantograph. And then when I got the pantograph, I was like super validated for having kept all of that stuff.
I believe it.
Yeah, all that that fancy like blue box elder burl from 2014 or
Oh,
whatever.
so
Like I
good.
could use it.
I actually have a picture here of one of your handles
Yeah,
using
there
the
you go.
pantograph.
Yeah, for sure. Three species of wood there. That front one, I think that was some box elder from 2014. And then we
Okay.
got some spalt maple, and in the back some ironwood.
Okay.
So it's kind of nice. You can play with complementary tones of wood, but you don't have to like pick one wood. Like there's four kinds of wood in that handle.
Right. And how deep are they inlaid? Like maybe an eighth of an inch, quarter inch?
Yeah, right in between there. So I'm
Okay.
usually at about 180 to 200 thou depth,
I gotcha.
just enough to where I can contour it sufficiently without like running into the bottom of the inlay.
Yeah, that would be a bummer. Fuck.
Yeah, man. So I'll even like I'll take some scribes and I'll scribe a light line around the block at the depth of
Mm,
my inlay. So while I'm contouring it, I can stay in the safe zone. I could
sure.
get a little visual reference there.
Right. Interesting.
Like
Hmm.
if you're gonna go with the Coke bottle shape, for instance, you're gonna have that
Right.
hollow behind the front of the handle. So at least when I'm like grinding that hollow in, I'm gonna be looking at that reference line on the edge of the block.
Right.
It might get wiped out later when I'm just contouring it, but it's good to have it there for a while.
And I'm guessing that you've probably done that.
I have been careful enough to where I haven't.
That's good. Nice. I was like,
But
oh my god,
yeah,
I don't want to know this answer.
I knew I would do it if I just slipped up even once.
You're just cowboying it. You're just like, well, let's go.
Yeah, I've made plenty of other mistakes, just not
Sure.
that particular one.
I got
Um,
another handle here.
oh
This
yeah,
dovetailed. Is that using the pantograph as well?
this one is super fun. All you need is a knee mill, like a Bridgeport or something. You could probably get it done on a little, bench truck
Oh,
mill drill or whatever.
yeah.
And you just go down to your Ace Hardware. You get you the $22.50 router bit kit for dovetails. They're carbide,
Really?
yeah, carbide router bits. And
Wow.
yeah, you get a couple of blocks of this, and if all you got is scales, just laminate your scales so that you get a block of color.
Mm-hmm.
Grab them in the vise, and you can just like route each one of those teeth out. The trick of it is knowing how many thousandths apart each, like the pitch distance of
Yeah.
that tooth count. Once you know that, that's 300 thou depth and 0.857 thou per tooth step over,
Sure.
and that gets you that with that cutter. And then they just like slide together. It's super satisfying.
I bet. It's just like,
And sometimes if you slide it together too far dry to check the fit and you didn't put any epoxy in there, you're like, I can't get it apart. Crap.
oh,
I wanted to break
no. Right. I wanted to also reference, we've referenced the Zangier a couple times. And so it's kind of hard to see. When we're recording this, the
Yeah.
video is kind of small, but when people
Yeah.
are watching this full screen, they'll be able to get in there. But it's basically these darker bars with the squiggles.
Yes.
And
Hey,
can you? Oh, go ahead.
real quick regarding this, is there any way
Yeah.
that I can like messenger you a picture and you can bring it up, or is that like too much of a pain right now?
If you emailed me a picture.
Okay. Well, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I won't. The main thing is like I don't hate it. I don't want to do a disservice to the person that owns that knife. It's a fine knife. I'm just critical of my own stuff. And so the Zangier in that one is not my favorite.
Okay.
But,
perfect. I'm glad I used it as an example.
Oh, damn you.
No, I'm sorry.
Curses. No, this is I have a curse actually to my work. And can you still see me there?
I can.
Okay, good. I have a curse to my work sometimes, and that is that sometimes the first time I make something, it almost comes out as like the best time I ever make it, unfortunately. You ever have that happen?
Yes, I have. Many times.
and it's like, why is that? And I think sometimes it's because I'm like so focused on it or in the moment of trying a new thing, and I'm trying so hard to have it come out how I want.
Sure.
That there's this extra like edge to my effort that when I've done it before, I almost would be like complacent on some little level without meaning to.
Overly confident.
Yeah.
It's gonna be easy.
Yes, and the tale of that is told in this steel right here, actually. But let's see here. Oh, hang on a sec. Yeah, so Zangier pattern though, you can see how it's got the squiggly bits, right?
Yeah.
And let's see here. Copy image. I'm just emailing you an image right now, dude.
Okay.
Let me see if it works. If it doesn't, I'll abandon the effort entirely. It's sending.
Perfect.
Okay, it's sent. But I'll talk about this one. So like,
because also I don't know anything about the history of that pattern.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's I will ramble about it at length to whoever like happens to be stuck talking to me at the moment. But
perfect.
This is one of these things. I was on Forged in Fire the first time, and Zach Jonas was on Forged in Fire with me too. And we all
cable.
Yes.
In the first round.
Yeah, the cable episode. So we all went out as a group of smiths to the Met.
Okay.
And we were looking at the Arms and Armor exhibit, naturally.
Sure.
And both he and I, at about the same time, I can't remember if it was him to me or me to him, just like, dude, look at this. And then we just like stood there staring at this musket that was in the case there. And it had like the most crazy little pattern welding in the barrel. Like we'd never seen anything like that. And we were just looking like, how the hell did they do that? And and then, Forged in Fire was like this whole other thing, whole other story, not for today. But the takeaway, one of the big takeaways of the whole like experience was having seen that, and then it got stuck in my head. How like can I make that? How am I going to do it?
Sure.
And I didn't like act on it for a while. I just kind of brewed back in there. But
Okay.
I started trying it, and it's like fold back on itself. Fold. There you go. So
I
you
just
can
pulled up the
see
picture that Stanley emailed.
this one is Merovingian down the center and edges, and it's got these bars of Zanjir interspersed. And you can see that it is 2 bars of bright with a bar of black in between and a bar of black on the edges. So 5 bar to make that little snake. And then on the outside of those thin little laminates too to create like borders the snake is trapped in. So this example right here shows how this pattern comes out if you do it all on a small power hammer.
Control.
Yes, exactly. To mean, yeah, to mean that like you can't, go whole hog forging press on it and like over smoosh the edges around. The pattern stays very crisp in there. And this was the first time that I had made that pattern successfully and etched a blade out of it. And it's still my favorite like look out of the ones that I've made. And that's because all I had was the 50 Little Giant at the time.
Sure.
And then like that first one that you showed, I made that, on the Baudry. And when I was still coming to terms with the force of the Baudry and how it would distort things.
Yeah.
And learning to like back off the gas counterintuitively sometimes.
Okay.
Anyway, this pattern, it was in the Met, and then like how do you Google that? Damascus-y thing with little squiggly bits, So a big part of
you didn't just take a picture?
Yeah, well, I wasn't, I'm a Luddite, dude. I was probably not even hip to Google image search at the time.
You're probably just rocking a flip phone like I was.
Oh, yeah, probably. Or maybe, I didn't even have a phone probably for a long time. But then I was like trying to figure out how to Google it and look for it. And then I changed tactics and I started looking at like all of the gun barrel welding stuff that I could. Because it was on a gun after all, and then like any intersection of like Islamic sword making, barrel making, and like Western work. Sure. And I finally got around to a work by this fellow named Lord Egerton of Tatton, who had written.
What a name!
I know,
Lord Egerton.
Yeah, that's bougie, right there. I'm surprised he was even into like peon work. But luckily for me, he was, because he wrote this whole write-up of having seen some Iranian smiths do this like 150 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
And just did a pretty good job describing how they had an anvil with a little like notch in it, and they would like have a 2-man team, a guy with a striker tool and the anvil notch, and the other guy with the steel and the hammer. And he'd hold the tool and strike it down into the notch, flip it, strike it back down into the notch, and just build up like alternating notches to build like a corrugated bar.
Right.
Out of this little stuff. And I was like, okay, 2-man team using tooling. This was answering questions. They're not just folding it in some way back and forth on itself. Sure. And then the trick was like he uses scroll tongs and bends it into a frill of loops by grabbing every other notch and squeezing it to a butt to like the next one. I'm paraphrasing, but then I was like, okay, so he's just like grabbing these dudes manually with like scroll tongs and like crimping them all the way up. And it was kind of like, well, the secret is that they just put a literal metric ton of work into this thing. Just doing it old school, but like go for it. And so then I was like, well, we're going to make like press dies and do it like as a 1-man operation. And just kind of made press dies, made scroll tongs, went for it from there and made it happen. But man,
which you documented on your Instagram,
I did.
Right?
Yeah, I probably like the second stuff that I had made, like after I got the hang of it. Once I actually had like a process to show.
Yeah.
But the fun part, man, was like when I had that frill of loops, it just looks like kind of like a harlequin lace ruffle or something. But then you squish it, and all the loops little like flatten out on each other in that staggered fashion. And as soon as it did that, I did it on the press. And as soon as it did that, I pulled that little dude out of there. I was like, yes, like that's it. I still have that one.
Oh
I
man,
I've been meaning to make a keychain out of it because it's just like the perfect little, size for it.
I bet that felt so good.
It really did. I had that, I think I yelled Eureka and ran in the house.
Who? I can't remember who it is that yells Eureka. Who's known for that? Is it philosopher?
Archimedes.
Archimedes. I was gonna say philosopher,
Yeah,
right?
when he figured out displacement versus weight, like measuring the gold in a crown, I think it was.
Mm.
Something like that. But yeah, man, I
Oh,
was stoked that day.
yeah, that's crazy. All right, we got more questions for you if you're up for them.
Yeah,
We're
shoot.
good. We're doing good on time.
Oh yeah, I'm doing all right.
Okay, great. All right, this next one is from Kevin Cunningham. Oh wait, we already did this one from Kevin. Sorry. Yeah, that was a panagraph question. All right. This next one is from Yerwin Nippenberg. He says, "Hey, hi Salem. Thank you for your time and inspiring work. Your Damascus is very clean. Has very clean, straight lines and precise geometric patterns. How do you keep your lines and shapes straight and crisp through during your forging? Thanks."
That's also a good question and a pretty big subject, but I think like um, practice, is
Practice.
a huge part of it.
Yeah.
You have to like make those mistakes till you learn like what not to do, and a big part of that is, well, you can set yourself up for success with some stuff. Like I always have, like a tail on my billet handles, to
Hmm.
where I have pretty good leverage and control over the rotation of the billet.
Sure.
And I work with handles usually rather than like a stub and some tongs,
Sure.
which you can also do a good job, but maybe square stock for your stub and like some good square tongs. You got to be
Right.
able to keep an index.
Right.
And then I used a press for heavy stuff for a while, but now I'm almost entirely a power hammer guy. And so I think it's a little easier on a press in a way to maintain your rotational index because it's
Mm,
slower and it's not like skipping around in the dies on you.
sure.
There are other difficulties that a press has over a power hammer, I would say. Cooling things quicker, more like side bulge, stuff like that. So you just got
Right.
to like learn the limitations and like quirks of whatever instruments you have at your hand to do your distortions and your drawing and welding with. But a power hammer is a nice thing to have because uh, particularly heavy power hammer, because it's like having a press in its ability to move material almost, but it also has the planishing capability of a small hammer.
Yeah.
As long as, like I was saying before, I had to learn how to back off of the gas a little bit sometimes, because if
Sure.
you're hitting it so hard without tumbling it enough, it's going to side pooch your billet out.
Right.
And then if you roll that up and hit it on the other side, and then you blast it until it side pooches the other way, it's creating all
Yeah.
this push pull inside, and it's causing things to like pinch out toward the corners more. Or and
Sure.
sometimes if your billet gets roly poly from side pooch, it makes it a little bit harder to keep it on that original square and
Right.
stuff like that. Sometimes you can use that to your advantage to straighten a billet that's gone a little bit awry. But the best thing is to like obviously stay away from having to straighten anything.
Yeah.
uh, just by taking your time, being careful, have like leverage against your billet, control the handle,
Yeah.
um, and then like a bunch of other stuff. One thing that I always see with newer guys is they'll come out of the forge and immediately like their handle will be bent because they're not holding the handle in plane with the bottom die of the hammer or the
Oh
press.
yeah. Sure.
And so it keeps getting bent out of line because they're too tall or too short or whatever the case
Yeah.
may be. And then when your handle is bent out of line, you don't have as good of like precise control over the angle of the billet and stuff like that.
Sure.
So there's a bunch of little like body mechanics that go into it for one thing.
I agree.
And then working with a hammer, I really like it because when you're getting into the cooler end of like a working heat, um, it's knocking scale off more, which is nice, less grinding, but it also moves the surface of the material more than it moves the core. And so if you hit it pretty hard with big die surface, like lengthwise, big flat dies, while it's getting cold, you can planish the skin of that material out to being like, I tried to do this the other day. I buffed the edge of one of my billets to see if I could get it to like shave my arm hair. I couldn't quite
Oh
do it,
wow.
but the point just being you can
Nice
get them
crisp.
sharp,
Yeah.
and that's really nice to be able to do. So if
Yeah.
you can get your billet down to where it's sharp on all the corners and they're 90-degree corners, then and you have to grind off as little as possible to go into like a restack or a four-way, then your results get more crisp because everything is just intentional. And so that's I think the biggest part of it is just a couple little tricks of body mechanics. Handle is big, and then sometimes, well, resquaring is kind of a different thing, right? But you also got to be able to resquare accurately. Um,
Sure.
so like the classic one is to forge on the bias and to like resquare at 45. Um, so that's the first one you'll probably be wanting to try. Then a good way to like practice up for that or have pretty good results early in the game is weld your handle stub on with that handle exactly at 45 degrees, like the handle tang, so that
Sure.
when that when that comes back flat or like dead vertical to the bottom die, you're like at a pretty good 45 from where you started. Keep an index that way, stuff like that.
Yeah. No,
Anything to
those are
add?
no, and I think the only thing I would add, or I guess corroborate, is it was probably a couple years after I started forging Damascus, and not when I was working with so I guess technically it was maybe after doing it a couple of years on my own that I realized at those cool because I kept having issues with really rounded corners. And when I went to go clean up the billet and put things back together, like in a 4-way or a 9-way or whatever,
Yeah,
um, it was I was wasting a ton of material, grinding through a ton of material, trying to get down and create grinding corners rather than
yeah,
ending with forging corners.
yep,
And then I realized, and then sometimes my corners would be really sharp, and I'm like, "What the hell's going on?" And I realized it was that I finally dawned on me that as the billet's cooler, and I'm still forging that exactly like you said, instead of moving or you're moving more the outside rather than from the inside
yeah,
and from the inside out. And it allows you to crisp up those edges and allows that material to come back together much tighter so that basically you're cleaning off the forge scale
yep.
and you have sharp corners.
Yeah, when you're done with the forge scale, you ain't got to do anything else, ideally.
Yeah, it makes such a difference. I mean, honestly, yeah. Even if you did it like the pH down bath to eat the forge scale off, those corners should be tight enough that when you go back into a 4-way, you don't have to sharpen them up or really grind
Yeah,
them. You're good to go. They're tight.
yep,
That was probably a big and that like you were saying, having that realization also helped me to understand more how material moves based on the different heat because it changes from when it's first out of the forge all the way down to cold or almost
yeah,
black. And a power hammer, for like you said, it really does help with those planishing blows to blast off that forge scale. I'm hopefully getting a power hammer soon here in the
ooh,
next 6 months to a year or something like that. Just a little 55 Anyang, but something that'll be great for forging blades, but
yeah,
also when I get down to the smaller bar stock size, help with planishing and really kind of truing things up. And yeah, I think it'll be really handy. And I'm excited about it. But I've been pressed basically
yeah,
most all my career. And
yeah. Well, obviously, you can do a bunch of crazy stuff on a press alone.
yeah, but it's like the same stuff you're talking about. Like my press is a C frame, and
Yeah,
honestly, when I get down to a certain or after a certain welding process, or certain welding round, like maybe it's the second to last welding round, and I really need things to stay nice and square, whether it's actually an actual square cross section of the bar or a rectangular cross section. But with a C frame, it has a tendency like the press comes down and right when it makes contact, kind of shifts over just a little bit.
yeah,
And so I've actually stopped working with handles on, and that way I can work one direction. I'll go in the one, and then I'll flip the bar around, and then
yeah.
work it from the other, starting with the other side, and that helps kind of self correct that potential
Totally.
like shifting off and parallelogramming that happens.
Well, I was hearing you actually talk about that very thing in the last interview with Jamie, and
Yeah,
yeah, that's smart. I was like, man, well, if that's clearly the thing to do in that situation,
yeah,
balance the forces.
yeah,
There's even some of that at the power hammer. A power hammer is just like a press in that it'll knock stuff rhombus if you're not careful,
Sure.
or parallelogram, and then you're stuck having to fix it. But an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right?
For sure.
So better to learn how not to do that. And there's even like with a C-frame press, it's pretty obvious. Well, it's got more flex on the one side, so it opens up a little
Yeah.
bit on one side and stuff like that. With a hammer, there's different mechanics at play.
Sure.
But I've analyzed those too, and they're similar. Like it's all about the ram guide. Is the ram guide a little sloppy or whatever?
I got you.
And if so, like what direction does that slop when it gets taken out by hitting the material? What's that top die doing? How's that geometry changing?
Sure.
And it always kicks the die like, so you got to forge in the center of your top die for one thing. And then if you notice it's still like kicking it one way, you got to like work it more on one side of the die and then flip flop it and work it on the other side of the die to create. There's all this little subtle stuff that you can do from observing your machine like that and then adjusting to work with the personality of your machine too.
One of the things I hope to be doing soon is I hope to be the owner. Excuse me. Excuse me. Okay. I hope to be the owner of a nice set of squaring dies. Because for a long time, I just fixed it under the hammer. But there are, even if you square things back up, what can kind of happen is your pattern kind of migrates off and rotates off while you still got a perfect square. The pattern is kind of rotated off slightly.
Yeah, that's not good.
No, it's not ideal, especially if you're trying to do something very specific. And so I've finally come to the conclusion in the last couple of years that I need a pair of squaring dies to really help retain squareness in a cross section.
Yeah.
Just because I'm tired of fighting it, one, and two, it really does affect the pattern.
Sure.
Another new thing for me is drawing dies on my press. I basically never used drawing dies until about a year and a half ago. I made some, and I just laughing at myself, like, why have I never done this before? Especially in early processes where I'm trying to, like, when I forge a C bar that will eventually get restacked for W's, I usually like to take it down to about a quarter inch thick. But to really get down to that thickness on a press is really challenging, especially on your initial bar stack. And it's such
takes forever.
Yeah,
and there's so much scale.
Yeah, so much scale, and I've always worked with flat dies, and so I was like, I'm over this, and I've made some drawing dies, and I had material. I've had material for years, just laying around, and I just never did it. And so I was so over it, and I finally made them, and I should have made them years ago when I first got that material, honestly, like 4 or 5 years ago.
Amazing how that is, right?
Yeah, I get stubborn in my ways.
Yeah,
I'm just just suffering for years because that's what I'm used to, or I feel like some weird sense of urgency that I can't afford to stop for even either a couple hours or half a day to do something that's gonna make my life easier. Like
always a carrot on a stick. Yeah.
Okay.
That's one degree to which I've tried to intentionally grow, is to get better at forcing myself to take time when I identify a thing just like that. To make the time, and it reaps big rewards.
Sure. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with working smart and hard.
Oh, for sure. You got to do both, man.
Yeah, I have a tendency to push myself to just work hard. And sometimes not as smart as I should be or as efficient as I should be.
So to interject here.
Yeah, let's hear it.
I am a big fan of the entire Artisans of Steel I celebrate the entire catalog. I've listened to all of them in one shot, a piece, in the shop.
Wow.
And, all the conversations have been great. But the one thing that I've never heard in any of them is somebody needing a bathroom break.
Oh, do you need to go?
I am at that moment, my friend. I will gladly talk more steel with you ad infinitum, but my back teeth are floating. Not gonna lie.
Back teeth are floating. I like that. Yeah. All right, go ahead.
All right. You got to entertain the peeps, man. I'll be right back.
I will. Trust me, I'm good at jabbering.
There you
go. All right, we still got a couple people in here. I'm gonna guess it's House Bear Forge. But if you're whoever it is, please give me a shout out. I'd love to see who it is. I love seeing who's actually in and watching and enjoying these live. And then Mike Poor has been rocking it in here. Let's see. What is this comment from? Oh, okay. Gotcha. New messages. Oh, we just talk amongst ourselves. Sometimes, Mike, sometimes I wonder, maybe, especially when I'm doing the Q&A, if I should pull people in and be like, "Hey, I'm gonna send you a link. Come talk to me." But so we're probably gonna be with Salem. We're gonna be dialing it down probably over the next 15-20 minutes. If anybody's got any additional questions, we still got a few from the Patreon we're gonna ask. I don't know why I said it like that, like I'm from Minnesota. We're gonna ask, but and then I'm gonna let Salem get back to it. I gotta get back to the rest of my day. I appreciate all of you coming and hanging out and checking out the live stream. And it's always nice to feel like I'm not in here by myself. We got some more pictures of some of Salem's stuff we're gonna go through as well, and we'll just get some short descriptions of him talking about some of this stuff. And then I think we're gonna call that good. I'm just looking over the questions right now. Looks like we got a good question from David. And it's about the pantograph, and Salem pretty much covered that, but we'll ask that question. And then we got another question from Mr. Hennenkamp. And and then a skater question from Mr. Gabe Fletcher.
All right, what is it?
Okay. Questions from the Patreon. Gabe Fletcher is asking, "Hey Salem, who's your favorite skateboarder, past and present, and what is your favorite trick that you can still do?"
Oh man, favorite skater is tough, dude. But I guess I would just have to go with my old school favorite when I was a teenager, and that was Rodney Mullen.
Rodney Mullen,
inventor
I
of the
recognize.
kickflip.
Okay.
And he's the father of modern street skateboarding for sure.
Oh, really?
He invented so much of that stuff and did it before anyone else did.
Sure. Was that before people were doing a lot of the board, like the balancing and spinning around on the edge of the board or the nose of the board and stuff like that, and standing
Yes
on the
and
trucks?
no. So like
in there with all that,
there's freestyle skateboarding, and that coincided with the skateboarding of the 80s. It was freestyle and vert, and street as we know it today didn't really exist yet.
Okay.
And with the end of the 80s, vert largely died out, and freestyle was never that big to begin with. So you had a bunch of guys kind of like soul searching and looking for like the next thing in skateboarding.
Sure.
And one of the greatest freestyle skateboarding champion of all time was certainly Rodney. Like he just won. He was like a winner. Like he won the entire 1980s at freestyle skateboarding.
Wow.
And so he invented a bunch of stuff that was used as flat ground maneuvers, kick flips, 360 flips.
Okay.
I don't know offhand like all the list of stuff that was his, but a ton of the stuff that you'll see people doing downstairs today or like into or out of grinds or whatever,
sure,
was just Rodney, like flat ground stuff, and some other freestylers too. But he was one of the guys that really started taking it to the street and being like, well, can we do this into a tail slide? Can we do this off 10 stairs? And really pushing the envelope. And he was like an early high watermark for technical skateboarding. Okay. In the 90s, you had these really popular videos, Rodney Mullen versus Daewon song. And that was my jam, dude. Like tray flip nose manual to like pop shove it to manual on a different picnic table to like flip out or what, just crazy stuff like that.
Wow.
That was my favorite then. Now I'm a little bit more nuanced in my tastes. I'm probably like Mark. He just got Skater of the Year last year, but man, yeah, put me on the spot with names. So there it is for like my favorite skaters, my all-time favorite. But best trick that I can still do today, I'm gonna say that's a hard flip.
What's that look like?
That's a vertical half flip. So it evolved out of the front side flip and the blind side varial kick flip. Daewon Song was the first one to really do it on camera, and
Okay.
it was called hard flip because it's a hard direction to flip your board, like behind you, blindside, blindside varial flip is what it is. But the modern version of it is more like a Muska flip. It just pops up vertical between your legs. It kind of looks like a magical like flying carpet ride the way it sucks up to your feet and just
Okay.
sticks. It's dope. I love it.
Nice. Dude, it still trips me out. Like I follow I have another friend who's way in the state and still stays in. He and I share videos back and forth through Instagram.
Yeah.
Seeing people do stuff in slow mo, like they'll usually show the normal speed and then they'll slow it down.
Yeah.
And just the little like taps and kicks that cause the boards to just go flipping out of control and do all these.
Yeah.
It seems so out of control, but obviously controlled at the same time because then they land it, and I'm just like, huh?
Yeah.
What?
No, the degree of board control and technicality in skateboarding today is absolutely incredible. I don't even like. I never could have gotten to that level. I'm just happy to skate to the degree that I can. But the amount
Sure.
of talent and practice that it takes to be able to do some of the stuff that like Shane O'Neill can do, is just they're aliens,
Sure.
frankly.
They're aliens. I'll have to
Yes.
look that up, Shane O'Neill. I'm not familiar. Yeah, I'm lucky to I like just cruising on a longboard. I don't do any tricks or anything. I can bomb hills pretty confidently, but I don't do anything other than that, just cruising.
Skateboards are fun, right?
Skateboards are fun. I've had to dial it back though, because I'm like, if I fall off the board now, I break my arm or anything,
Oh yeah,
hopefully it heals, but that's gonna really slow down my productivity in the shop.
that is a fact. I think about that stuff. I've always had a bit of a stubborn streak and somewhat of a uh, I don't want to say self-destructive because it ain't quite that negative, but all the
Mhm.
same, like I am pushing 40, but if I want to go to like practice my hard flips on the bank at the skate park, I'm gonna do it. Broken wrist be damned.
Oh
But
wow.
I understand like it's a risk on another level too. My wife's like, what are you doing, man? Are you sure you want to be doing that? I'm like,
Yeah.
well, I'm trying not to get old.
Yeah. All right. Next question is from Brian Hinnenkamp of Tortuga Blade Works. He says, I've seen you using CrewForge V in a lot of your work, and I'm curious your thoughts on it. I've recently come into a decent supply of it, but haven't experimented with it very much. So, CrewForge V.
Sure.
Yeah.
It sucks to hand sand. It makes a nice mono steel blade, but not a fun knife to finish.
Yeah.
And so I prefer to really use it in pattern welding or sanmai. It makes a wonderful core between like stainless sanmai. That's just real dark. It cuts great.
Yeah.
So I like it for that. For pattern welding, it works great. I've made a few mosaics out of it, but I haven't made anything too involved with it.
Sure.
Really, I got a bunch of it from the DeRosiers, and I talked with Adam a fair amount about CrewForge V because he's used a lot of it too.
Yeah.
And his opinion of it at the time when I was like really starting to use it in pattern welding much was that it wasn't very good for twist patterns. And those guys love their twist patterns, and I
They
was
do.
doing that at the time too. So I kind of gave up on that for a little while, and then I tried some stuff with it, and true to what he said, it seemed to not like to twist very well combined with 15 and 20.
Okay.
So the reason that he thought it was problematic, which I'm not saying that's not a thing, but I think there's more
Sure.
to it as well, is
Yeah.
that he thought that the CrewForge V was more red hard than 15 and 20 is at a given temperature. And so, given the differential like forging characteristics between those two steels, he thought that the 15 and 20 was going to start to shear well before the CrewForge V would. And that's why you would get shear along the twist lines sometimes when really going for it like that. And I did experience that. However, I used a lot of it in just like other kinds of like production Damascus. So just banging out like straight layer billets of random and ladder to the point where I noticed things like on a restack of that stuff, It was easier with fine layers, but on a restack, so you get like 4 chunks now, and you're just
Yeah.
getting up to layer count. Um, Sometimes it would blow apart a little bit on one end of the billet. Like the welds wouldn't stick perfectly, and you would hit
Oh
it
wow.
sideways. If you hit it sideways too early, it would like open up a little bit.
Sure.
And so I learned how to get past that. And it's really like CrewForge V just needs like quality atmosphere. It needs you to not get it too hot. It will crumble on you.
Oh yeah. I've done that.
Not fun, right?
No. Not at all.
How to make a knife out of cottage cheese. Step 1, overheat the hell out of it.
Throw it away.
Yes.
Yeah.
uh, so you got to get your temp a little bit like more careful than you do with 1080, and then you got to like a soak really helps on a restack. Just give it that good like at least like 5 minutes extra at temperature with that good atmosphere, and that's good. It's good practice anyway for all of your pattern building, but especially for
Sure.
CrewForge. Like if you don't do it, it'll tell you about it. But once I started like understanding that about it, like how it wanted to be treated and it needs a little bit more care, then I was like, well, let's revisit twists. So and then I would just like soak something pretty good before twisting it. Just to get that carbon equalized a little bit more, get some grain growth across the boundaries, stuff like that.
Sure.
And then make sure it was up at an even welding heat, and then just pop it right in the power twister and crank the hell out of it. And so the combination of twisting hot, twisting fast, and having given it that quality soak, it's no problem to twist. Actually, it turns out.
Oh wow.
I don't see a problem with like differential hardness at a given temperature, or perhaps it's because at that welding temperature it's not such an issue. But now I can just crank it until it almost looks just like a smooth round bar before
Oh
it'll want
crazy.
to shear. That's what
Wow.
I love that about power twisting, because I
Yeah.
hand twisted a lot of stuff, and it
Sure.
cools off while you're twisting it. And then
Yeah.
if there's a part that twists tighter and you keep trying to twist it too much while it's getting too cold, it'll start to shear there.
Yep.
But if you're power twisting, and especially if it's a little bit like heavier of a bar that holds that heat better,
Yeah.
you can see it actually build heat from being twisted because of that rotational
Oh
friction
wow.
inside the material will brighten up.
Sure.
It'll maintain heat as long as you just keep twisting the hell out of it. That's really
That
fun to
makes sense.
watch. Yeah, so it kind of really enables you to do some stuff um, more successfully than just like twisting by hand, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't done hardly any twisting myself personally. Um, and so I haven't seen that, but that does make sense. I've seen that under large power hammers for sure,
Yeah,
and even smaller power hammers as well. It's really cool to see. But I can understand how that would do that in a twisting, especially a large stock.
yeah, for sure. And then it makes you change your outlook a little bit. You learn things about like Turkish twist and how to build patterns like that from guys that don't have a power twister, or at least you always used to. And it was very much twisted by hand or build a hand twisting jig. If you want to get really crazy about it, use a torch and get it all like perfectly twist count and stuff like that.
Sure.
um, but to twist it by hand, you kind of got to leave it a little bit smaller, um,
Oh yeah.
and then twist it a lot tighter, because as soon as you get that stuff forge welded back together, you want to stop hitting it because it's already pretty thin. You don't got a lot of room to like forge those welds down.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Especially old school, if you're going flux and making a sword or something, your bars were half inch when you twist it, but your sword's like 3/8 thick at the spine,
Yeah.
when you're grinding it. So there's not a lot of like
Oh wow.
room in there. But if you twist it an inch and then you twist the hell out of it until it's like fine thread bolt, um, then you can actually forge that out quite a bit longer before your twist really gets loose.
Over
So
elongates. Yeah, sure.
yeah, it's just kind of a different strategy of coming at it,
Sure.
um, from like thicker stock and like power twisting.
Right. All right, we got another one here from David Singer. He says, Salem, what got you interested in using a pantograph, and could you go into more detail about it and its possible applications? Now, I know we already talked about it a little bit
Yeah.
previously, but how were you first introduced to them, and how did you decide that that was something you could use for your knife making?
I think the first time that I ever really kind of clocked pantographs was Alan Elishewitz has and uses stuff like that, pantographs, and like other jig bores, and like tool room lathe. He's a machine guy, and
Okay.
so he had a little bit of instructional stuff out there about how to use pantographs in knife making. There's still not a lot. It's not a very developed field, or rather, it has been, but not by guys that have shared much. So like
Sure.
Michael Walker, Owen Wood, the really like fancy art folder makers tend to get super wizardy with using pantographs and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, and like I say, if I had all the time and money in the world, I'd be knocking their doors down for classes and stuff. But
Yeah.
instead, what I got to do is buy that $750 pantograph I got to drive all the way to Wyoming for, and then just muddle through on my own, because that's all those dudes did back in their day too. They
Yeah.
just got like a 3-decade head start on me is all. So
It's just a few years.
yeah, just a little bit, but I'll get that good and they'll be dead. So ha. But anyway, yeah, and obviously you can use it as a poor man's CNC to just cut things to shape, batches of liners and stuff for folding knives. And
Sure.
that's what like Elishewitz was using it for. But I had seen some inlay that was being done with it. I saw one at Stan Fujisaka's shop when I was over there on Oahu. And then I told Kevin Willie that I was looking for one. Do you know Kevin?
Mm-mm.
He's like he's a really good mosaic pattern welder. He makes like spurs and color
Okay.
case hardened, like cool stuff. And he's like
All
a
right.
master rawhide braider, consummate cowboy, Wyoming guy.
Yeah.
And he's actually a big power hammer and like Baudry guy too. So he's like the Baudry guru of the United States, really.
Oh, really?
Part of his business is rebuilding him. He's a very skilled machinist. Anyway, I had told him that I was looking out for a pantograph, and he was like, "Oh, I found you this one. You're gonna have to drive all the way over here for it." And so I did. It was quite an adventure, and dropped by Alex Steele shop and hung out with Will and stuff on the way, and broke down on the way back, and
Oh, perfect.
all kinds of stuff. But I knew I was going to do inlay and maybe some engraving. But and the inlay was right away, because, like I said, I got that drawer just full of tool stuff that I could inlay.
Sure.
So that was it right off the bat. I had to figure out how to make patterns and things like that. There's a little bit about it. Alicia, which was sharing, you can cast patterns, kind of like you cut out the negatives, and then you put like roughly cut positives, but then just like fill the difference with epoxy, and then like a resist, so it'll pop again. Then you have a perfect like pattern negative and positive set for like inlays. And I did that. I tried some other ways, so I just kind of built all that out till I was getting inlay that was working, and then it's still not like, I want to say you can do all that stuff by hand inlaying, and it's pretty approachable that way too. It just takes elbow grease and time, and detail, but you're not saving any time, at least on one knife handle, by doing it with a pantograph versus hand inlay. They're both difficult, and they both take a long time. Where you're going to save time is on the second or third handle from that pattern that you made. But making the pattern set is pretty time intensive. Then I go all the way from like, I'll take a knife that I'm making, I'll photograph it, I'll send that to my computer, I'll put that in Inkscape, I'll draw a handle around it, I'll, like make inlays on the computer, I'll print it out at scale, and then I'll go and like transfer that back into like the real world on materials again to make patterns. It's this whole thing.
Sure.
It's very fascinating and kind of interesting, because you get really locked into it and lose track of like the outside world. It's that kind of work, which I like. And so it's kind of fun. I only use the pantograph when I really feel like I have time to. I can't just be using it on every knife, because me being dumb, I just want to like make a new inlay pattern for every handle rather than use the one that make the money
just
on
like
the one I already made.
Pattern. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm fighting myself there.
Yeah.
But then it was like, well, inlay is not quite enough. So let's see to what extent can we use this thing for engraving. And the thing is, like, you're not going to engrave knife blades with it. You could, but it's not ideal.
Okay.
I'd rather be like hand engraving them, if anything. But it does really well on handle materials. You just have to have the right handle material. You know how it is. You might want to be like faceting a handle and like have some really kick-ass, like crisp facets and stuff. But if it's in the wrong material, you can't even see it.
Yeah.
It's like so crisp, like a diamond in your hand, and then you just go to photograph it and it's just gone.
There's nothing there.
Yeah, and it's very similar with like engraving too. If you do it on too light of a surface or just whatever the case may be, it's kind of wasted effort,
Yeah.
or at least unless a person has it in their hand, you know.
Yeah.
And then so you got to pick the right material, right color of materials, and then you got to find some flatter spaces on the handle to put it. So there's all these kind of challenges to working into your handle work. But you know that fortunately we both like to do you know, handles that have some contour, but like also a lot of like flat spots and facets
Sure.
and stuff too.
Yeah.
So you can find flat spots to use here and there, you know, if you look for them. So it's been pretty interesting to create patterns that I can cut onto handles and stuff. I want to do a lot more of that
Hmm.
going forward. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's no end with the pantograph. You could just learn that thing forever.
Do you have? I feel like I've seen you. Maybe you've seen this already. That you've done this. I can't remember if this exists or not. So it must exist somewhere. But to do, God, what's that called? Where they do that checker filing or whatever for texturing like pistol grips and stuff
Like
like
gun
that.
stock checkering.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
do like an inlay, like a pantograph inlay on like a Bowie knife or a hunter or something like that.
you probably could. Matter of fact, come. I mean, just thinking about a checkered inlay is pretty sweet. I would feel like John Doyle would probably do that anytime now
Oh yeah, I bet that's. I bet I
if he
have
hasn't
seen John
already,
Doe. Yeah, I know. I was like, I swear I've seen something like that before.
because he does sick
Um,
inlay too. He does it by hand, but he also
right.
is like good at checkering already.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Just thinking of like contrasting like a bog oak or a black ebony
yeah,
um with something, obviously something blonde, some sort of maple or something like that. Um but
yeah, that's a
not
fun thing about inlays is contrast and stuff too, for sure.
yeah.
It would be neat. Like, have you ever seen fish scale checkering?
No.
So it
I don't
uses the
think so.
same way. You would see it on like a rifle stock, for instance. It's
Okay.
quite a bit more rare, but you know how a carp scales are. They're really like semicircular and they come
Yeah.
together like Lundell's like dragon scale stuff.
Right.
But just imagine each one of those scales being like 3/16 or maybe quarter-inch tops, you know, in general size, and then just
Mm.
overlap to form a checkering pattern. It's pretty sweet if you look it up sometime.
I've never heard of that. No, that sounds interesting.
I think you could probably pull a Lundell, but in wood, and just make like a scale block and inlay that scale block, and then check fish scale checker on top of it. So you had like inlay multicolor. But I'm not
Yeah,
going to ever
right.
do that because that sounds crazy.
Lame.
Oh, it sounds awesome, but geez, like it's funny like about work ethic in knife making and pattern welding. I
Yeah.
think there's some weird reluctance or resistance I think that people have to going too far into like a pattern, for instance. Like
Mm,
if it gets beyond like a couple of days, maybe, um, then they're just like, well, that's too much work, and
sure.
you know that pattern is too much work or too much waste or something.
Yeah.
And you even see that with guys that sell multiple $1,000 knives, you know, master smiths and stuff. It's like,
Right.
uh, it just seems odd to me because you're like, well, isn't this the most fun part of the whole thing? Isn't this like what you signed up for,
Right.
doing the fun hot work and running the power hammer and stuff?
Yeah.
So not only do you get to do more of that, but it's a way more interesting kind of a new pattern. And like, I don't know if anyone told you when you signed up for this, but knife making is like super hard work, you know. And like people work on a knife that takes them a couple of weeks to make, but like get impatient with spending more than 2 or 3 days on the pattern welding. It's
Yeah.
just kind of funny. Um,
Yeah. No,
I
go
saw
sorry, go
like
ahead.
Kelly Vella was just talking about that somewhere on the interwebs too. Just about like somebody was asking her what it took to do, you know, that kind of quality pattern work. She's just like, well, it just takes a ton of hard work.
Yeah.
You just got to accept it.
Yeah. It's just part of it. It's like hand sanding. It's just part of it. You just
Yeah.
gotta do it. Um, yeah, I even I think when it comes to being, I don't know what the word is. I'm really struggling with finding my words today, but I'm always trying to like economize material and stuff like that. And especially when I was at Dragon's Breath Forge, I was forging blades, mosaics, and I was really trying to like, part of it was me trying to economize the material, but also I was really kind of like pushing the material to see how what it could handle forging wise,
Yeah,
forging really close to finished dimension, especially under a power hammer. It's so much more, you or at least you can do it in a much more timely manner.
yeah, it gets
And
practicable.
yeah, and I was getting really good at forging really close to dimension, but then but the downside of that was my patterns were starting to get a little bit more drawn out and distorted in ways that I wasn't
Yeah.
necessarily wanting them to do. And
Hmm.
I'm like, cool, like I did a really great job forging this blade, but now the pattern's a little kind of smushed out and stretched out in a lot of weird ways, and that's not what I'm
Yeah.
looking for. And so now I'm like, okay, I gotta remember, like I'm making good money on these knives. It's okay to, I know that I can forge really close dimension.
Yeah.
So I don't need that like feather in my cap anymore. I guess I've already got it. I don't need to keep
Right.
reaching for it. So now I can make a conscious decision to step it back so that I'm forging maybe a little bit somewhat to dimension, but maybe a little bit more to profile so that I'm
Yeah.
retaining the pattern the way I want it to. And that was where I was
Yeah.
really getting a lot of that distortion, was just forging it really close to finished dimension or heat treating dimension. It, the closer you get, the more distortion you're going to introduce potentially.
Oh
And
yeah.
so now I've started to dial it back and try to keep that in mind. And even now, sometimes I'll cut off even uh, uh, maybe a quarter of a cubic inch of extra material. I'm like, wow, there's so much material in here. I'm just going to keep forging it. And then realizing I'm already at size. Maybe I
Yeah.
just need to stop.
Yeah. No, that's big for sure.
It's, yeah,
There's just a ton of that that has to go into just your overall plan for a thing, right? Is the degree to which you're going to distort this or that and where to stop.
for sure.
I always feel a little bit funny, like going to teach at CMA. Um,
Oh, yeah,
like myself and like Nick Anger probably we're a little bit of odd ducks out there in that we're the knife makers, and our
sure.
approach to forging is going to be a lot different than like a Pat Quinn's approach to forging.
Right.
So like a hallmark of Pat's work is just it's very volumetrically planned out and very cleanly finished forged, like hardly any grinding necessary type of thing.
Yeah,
And that's great to be able to do, and on some stuff that's absolutely totally the right thing to do.
sure.
um, but it's and then I go there and I'm like, okay guys, we're gonna forge fancy Damascus stuff, only we're gonna leave it like really thick and like not really forge it all the way to shape, and because
Right.
reasons. But it's just a funny feeling to be there in like the church of forging to shape almost.
Yeah,
and
right.
and then just be like turning out these awful looking knife blanks. But I'm like, it's because you don't want your edge bar to have like a kink in it or whatever the heck, the case
Yeah,
might be there.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and honestly, until I had that happen or started to have that happen more frequently, I was like, "Oh," because for a long time I was like, I'm not a good bladesmith unless I could forge really close to heat treating dimension."
Yeah,
And and I needed to push myself to do that. But then I realized, "Oh, that's not actually necessary." Especially like it's great for brute to forge or maybe for monosteels,
yeah,
but when it comes to Damascus, sometimes a pattern calls for you really forging close to dimension. Like a random pattern benefits greatly from being
yeah,
forged close to like heat treating dimension. But if it's more of a mosaic, then you have to start taking into consideration what kind of distortion, whether it's from actual impact distortion or if it's from drawing out the tip or pulling down the heel.
right,
How's that going to actually affect the overall presentation of the pattern? And is that something that you actually want to do, or do you want to take a step back and say, maybe on this knife, I'm going to take a step back and I'm just going to forge the profile to preserve some more of these clean patterns, or the pattern that I've just spent, maybe 2-3
yeah,
days making. And that's the other thing, is I was spending all that time making the pattern, and then I'd have enough material for like 1 or 2 tries, and then I'd screw up the first one and be like, oh
Oh
fuck,
man.
and just barely have enough for the second one. And the
Yeah.
second one hopefully would work out, or like I said before, I've had to remake, like basically start all over and make new material, but take into consideration an extra whatever quarter of a cubic inch or a quarter of a
Yep.
or half a cubic inch to allow myself to still get that size I'm looking for without having to really get crazy on drawing out the tip or drawing down the heel or the edge and stuff like that. And it's just,
Yeah.
I think the biggest key for anybody who's pursuing this, and especially playing with Damascus, is developing those skills so that you can make those decisions instead of the way the knife turns out is just kind of a result of your own limitations, stacking up those skills so you can make a conscious decision to push a dimension or push a pattern a certain way, or or to not, you know.
Well, yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I think you should push yourself to have skills that you don't necessarily always use.
Hmm.
And like when you have a range of skills that you can choose to use or not, or to a certain extent, then that's where like your personal style starts to come in because of the choices that
Sure.
you're making. So
Right.
like for me, I like a little bit of a heel drag in my edge bar. I don't
Sure.
have to have it there, but I like to show that it was hand forged to shape, just not to the point where it's wiped out, precision in the overall pattern.
Sure.
Stuff like that. It's a choice that makes my work look a little bit different than somebody else's that was doing
Sure.
similar work. A thing that I like that J.D. Smith said one time was, you want your work, well, you want to be like, compare yourself to an engine. You want to have like, you want to put the work into where you have like big displacement, like lots of skills, experience, so that when you go to do this impressive quality of work, it doesn't look like work that was being done by an engine that's wrapped out at like red line RPMs and screaming,
Mm.
struggling to go that fast. You
Yeah,
want it to
sure.
look like your engine was just like idling along comfortably while you did this, badass project.
I Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, so or just as a musician, you practice scales a lot faster than you might use something based on that scale in a lick while you're playing on stage.
Sure.
Because that way you've done it in a harder setting at a faster speed, so when it comes time to use it, when the rubber hits the road, you don't fall all over your own feet.
Absolutely.
How many mixed metaphors was that? Wow.
It's perfect. It's beautiful. Well, we're almost on at 3 hours, and I really appreciate your time and being here to be part of this podcast and be part of the calendar. Like I said, you've been an inspiration and you've been a friend for a long time, and I really feel fortunate to have you to bounce ideas off of or ask questions of, because, like I said, outside of the Damascus, like, you have just an incredible breadth of skills and knowledge that anybody could benefit from knowing a bit more from. Um, One last question I do have for you is, what what do you have coming down the pipeline, or that you can share and talk about, that you're excited about, like some upcoming projects? Whenever I see makers, like a lot of the makers when I was at Nashville, I was like, well, what's next after this? What do you got coming up that you're really excited about? Um, so what do you got
Well,
going
a few things coming up. I'm going to be in Phoenix mid-October here. Just getting out and teaching a bit. I'll be doing a demo on the. Let me check this. I want to say it's the 15th, but I better make sure real quick.
Sure.
Yeah, Saturday the 15th there.
Okay.
Um, and my demo will be like multi-bar pattern welding, um, and then like bird's beak uh,
Sweet.
applied to multi-bar pattern welding.
Yeah.
Just stuff that you can demo with hand hammering out of a janky gas forge. So that should be fun. If anybody out there wants to come see that, that's going on. I always have a ton of fun with those guys in Phoenix. Then I'm coming back for the winter, and this winter I'm planning to shack up and just work a lot on my engraving. I've already
Oh,
been
cool.
doing that, but develop it out further, because ultimately I really want to incorporate engraving onto handles that mimics or pairs with the Damascus. So geometric Damascus, geometric engraving, maybe.
Mm,
I want to
yeah.
work on some like more Kumiko based mosaics. So uh, Did you see that like the Aaron Wilburn collab knife that I did, the like hex mosaic one?
I did.
I want to do more stuff like that, like tons of little bits, inside of a
Sure.
flat can type stuff.
Yeah.
That'll be fun. I'm working on a mosaic Copus sword right now.
Oh,
That's
killer.
Yeah, it's gonna be a good one. I think it's got good pattern and big old chonky blade and stuff. So, but now I
Yeah.
got to get through like carving fullers on it and stuff like that. So I got to finish that up this winter. I have a very patient customer on that one. I'm getting into gun bluing a little bit and maybe some wire inlay, just getting onto that tip. A little bit more on the applied arts embellishment, bit by bit,
Sure.
when I can find the time to practice. Um,
Nice.
Other than that, it should be a pretty quiet winter, hopefully. Last winter was a little bit more eventful than I prefer, so we're hoping for an
Okay.
easy one.
Yeah. Did you guys get a little bit more snow than you were looking for?
Oh, we got tons, man. We had like roofs collapsing around here and everything
Oh my
broke at
god.
once. Yeah, it
Oh.
collapsed under our heat pump, so then our house was freezing. It
Oh
was
no.
it was awesome.
Nice. All
So
right.
yeah, hopefully a quiet winter, man.
Yeah. I'm wish for a quiet winter for you as well. And where can everybody find you? Are you Salem Straub across the socials, or are you also Promethean Knives?
Um, let's see here. Yeah, my website is prometheanknives.com.
Okay.
Salem Straub on the other socials, Instagram, YouTube. Yeah, pretty easy to find.
Nice. Let's see. We got, I think, one more. Did you cover the scarf world question? I stepped out. Yes. Yes, Mike
Yeah,
Bohr,
no,
he did cover the scarf world question.
yeah, scarf everything on all six sides. No,
Perfect.
wait, all seven sides.
Oh,
No,
seven's even better.
yeah, no scarves, man, no scarves.
No scarves. All right. Well, everybody, I appreciate you jumping in and being part of the conversation, asking so many great questions, and helping to make this podcast a reality. I thank you again, Salem, for being here and having the time and sharing your wisdom, knowledge, and understanding and quips with us, and also your many metaphors. And again, for anybody who is interested in being part of these conversations and to be able to ask a question directly to these very talented makers that we have on these podcasts, you got to go over to the Patreon, Malmosy Fire Arts Patreon, and sign up at the illuminated individual level. That's a hard one to say fast. I keep
Sure
trying to
is.
say it fast, and it's it's not an easy one to say fast. um, and then you can be part of these conversations. You can be here for live chat. You can ask questions directly to the makers. You have access to these afterward. Um, and yeah, thank you all, and thank you, Salem, and we'll talk to you all again soon. Peace out.